Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku found the stars instead of becoming a hero? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku lay on his bed, mood dark and thoughts wandering into strange eddies as he considered life. To be specific, his own life. He had no quirk. The idea of being a hero seemingly moved farther and farther day by day, as the world seemed to shave away at it, chipping at the gleam of heroism. Mockery over his lack of a quirk. Normally he ignored it, but today had been long and the whispers and rumors plentiful. If I'm not a hero, what would I be? Izuku didn't know. Today we're moving on to the science of the solar system. Hana-sensei sketched quick kanji across the board at the front of the room. A simple diagram of the solar system hung to the side, a visual aid to the solar system. Planets and orbits sketched and annotated with interesting short facts. Izuku paid close attention, even as Hana-sensei went into the basic overview. Gravity, how the planets and various asteroids orbiting each other. But then his pen paused, eyes locking on what she was writing even as her words began to echo in his head. Since the appearance of quirks, space exploration has been set to the back burner. The last major advancement was the NASA Opportunity rover, which explored the surface of Mars early at the turn of the millennium. However, with the development of quirks, resources and general research and scientific studies turned inwards form our solar system to the strange phenomenon that flows through us even today. Izuku found himself speaking up before she moved on. So, what's the current state of space exploration? Is anyone still sending things up to space? A half-second of surprise at Izuku's comment before she responded. Unfortunately, the majority of space programs were defunded by the early 2040s, deemed as distractions and superfluous compared to the surging number of quirked people during that era. Izuku frowned slightly, tapping his pen on his notebook, even as he mentally began to distance himself from his class once more. He felt it, sticking and tumbling in the back of his mind even as he resumed taking basic notes. He was still distracted. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but instead of going home, Izuku took a turn for the library. He didn't have much homework to do, but he had questions and wanted answers. Izuku all but slammed another book closed and shoved it aside, resting his hands on his head as his thoughts race. For hours of research, from the computer to the books, to scientific journals, there was nothing. What the F-? He hissed under his breath, deeming the situation F-ed enough to swear. Izuku pushed off from the desk with a scowl, and stalked back through the non-fiction section of the library, reaching out and grabbing any book on advanced physics or propulsion, or history of invention or exploration. When he had another 6 in hand, he returned and started paging through them with a fervor, referencing appendixes and glossaries for space flight and associated topics. He had been at it for hours already, having come to the library early on his day off. Frustrated, he leaned back and stared up at the ceiling, thoughts racing. The problem? Space exploration had been shut down and abandoned in favor of quirks, despite the leaps and changes in technology in the last 200 years. Advanced fabrication, creative and exoteric materials, better fuel and environmental studies and solutions. All of which were steps towards sustainable spaceflight. But none of it was hooked together, pushed to the conclusion. A solution, a logical and easy way out of this mess of a dilemma he found himself in, was missing. The idea he did have was audacious, insane, absolutely bonkers. So why did he find himself reaching for an empty notebook? Horizon number 1. Izuku stared at his handwriting before looking down at the table of books. And deep inside his soul, the spark of passion lit up once more. After all, people say it's impossible to be a hero without a quirk. What's one more impossible dream? For years later. Midoriya, you want to go to UA too, right? The sound of laughter dragged Izuku's attention up from his desk, where a notebook and a fairly advanced physics textbook were open before him. Green eyes locked with the teacher in confusion. They were talking about future careers, and Izuku had zoned out. What should he say? Yeah. I want to go to UA. A creaking sound echoed from the shifting form of Bakugu in front of him. What did you say, shitty N? Before Kaken could get up in his face, he slid his notebook and textbook into his bag to the side of the desk with a practiced ease, even as he shrunk back, eyes half closed to block the flash of the explosion in the center of his desk. As his desk was blown to the side, Bakugu grabbed the collar of Izuku's shirt. F-head and the stars, morons like you can never be a hero. You're quirkless and weak and F-delusional. Used to this, Izuku bit back the swell of muttered words that boiled in his throat. That his dreams were possible. Not just by focus and drive, but by numbers, by statistics and math and science. Instead, he looked away, face neutral even as his teeth ground tight in the back of his jaw. To calm himself, he focused on a design. A ring. Spinning on an orb at a specific speed, with a specific rotation. As the teacher shouted for order, Izuku was shoved back and out of his seat, as Bakugu turned back to his seat. Effing airhead moron. Sighing under his breath, Izuku shoved his desk into place as the teacher started the lesson. Of course, when school ended, Izuku wasn't quite fast enough. Standing up after the beating that Bakugu and his cronies dished out, Izuku spat a mouthful of blood to the side, hand wiping away the trickle from his nose. It didn't feel broken, but the heat and bruise of his cheek definitely meant he would have something to show for it. Sighing, he dragged his bag out from where he had placed it under his chair and glanced at the open window. Oh demon. It. Sighing, he slid the bag on and headed for the door, ignoring the lingering echo of Bakugu's parting words. Go take a swan dive off the roof. Spitting another mouthful of blood in the trash can as he passed, Izuku sped down the stairs, being careful to check that Bakugu and his cronies had already left. With the coast clear, he jogged to the back of the school under his classroom's window and saw his notebook, Hero Analysis number 11, floating in the koi pond. F-. Crouched down, he reached in and pulled out the notebook. Damn it. This one was almost filled too. Crap. Flipping through gently, he was suddenly very happy he used waterproof ink pens for the last 3 notebooks. Aside from some gentle smudging and a few pages that were stuck together, he could salvage most, if not almost all, of his work. Flipping through the book carefully, he started his walk home, aware he had already missed the bus. Ducking through a side alley, he came out on the edge of the train tracks. A few minutes of detouring and a shortcut through the underpass and he could head straight home. He slowed his steps as a thought passed through him. He could go work on the project. It wouldn't be far, and his mom wouldn't be home for a few more hours. He had time. Picking back up the pace, and with his mind in gear, he jogged towards the underpass. Taking the corner fast, he skidded to a halt and then immediately backpedaled. What the hell? In front of him was a shifting, quivering mass of slime and ooze, a dark green mass with only 2 massive eyes and a grin formed of teeth in the center. A medium-sized disguise kit. And just in time too. Panicking, Izuku stumbled back, the slime surging his way, but tripping, Izuku stumbled back and away. Barely dodging the first reaching swipe of slime. Hitting the ground, he scrambled backward, muttering and stammering in panic, out of the dark of the overpass and into the late afternoon sunlight. The slime rose and began to follow, a menacing deep green wave of evil intent that surged up, marked by 2 gleaming eyes and a row of teeth. A sound like a steam valve breaking caught both his and the villain's attention. Quickly after, the echoing impact of steel on concrete echoed out of the underpass. Halt, villain! For I am here! All might. Holy shit! The villain panicked and turned to attack, but he suddenly scattered, a flat hand slapping down and through the slime with enough force to cause a burst of air in its wake. As the villain was slapped down through, he was directed and shoved towards another hand with a bottle held in it. Before Izuku could process what was happening, the vast majority of the villain was suddenly crammed into a soda bottle. Bitch, worry not, I have come to save the day. Are you all right, young man? With the slime villain out of the way, Izuku could see him. Tall, broad-shouldered, and ripped like a tank. Dressed in a casual pair of green cargo pants and a white t-shirt taut against his form, he looked amazingly tough and durable. Why, I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. All Might, sir. He bowed rapidly in thanks, but after the third one he was already speaking. I had a question. Yagi tensed. He had a few more minutes of hero form, but he didn't want to push it too far. He still had to drop off the slime, and then grab the rest of his groceries from where he left them earlier. He glanced at the kid, taking in the boy's state with a practiced eye. While the lack of slime near him spoke that the villain hadn't hurt the young boy, there were other signs that drew his attention. A dark bruise forming on the corner of his lip and jaw, a bloody drop of darkening red on the collar of his gakurin. He could spare a few seconds, perhaps offer some advice or a number to call. Crouching, All Might took a knee, putting his shoulders about equal to the young man's head. Of course, my boy, what's your query? The greenette bit his lip and took a long, slow breath. I want to help people, to save people with a smile. I am quirkless. Can I be a hero? Yagi was expecting many things. How to deal with bullies, how to deal with abuse or self-harm. He had even expected the classics. Can I be your sidekick? Can you train me? Quirkless. It had been a very long time, but he remembered. He remembered being injured, being weak. I'm sorry, my boy. And out of fear, he said something he knew he would regret. I don't think a quirkless person could be a hero. The job is dangerous. I've seen great and powerful heroes, with quirks of every shade and power, and I've seen them lose. Seen them be injured and killed by our way of life. If you want to save people, I would suggest another field. Be a doctor, a detective, a police officer or a firefighter or something like that. Heroism is far too dangerous for a disadvantage like that. All Might risked a glance and caught the shattered look in the young man's eyes. He felt his heart bleed and writhe with the injustice of crushing a young man's dreams, even as his own wound pulsed in memory of why he was saying what he was. Thanks for being honest. The voice was soft and monotone, and it made part of Yagi flinch. I must go now. Be safe, my boy. Yagi turned back, checked the bottle was secure, and leaped away, heading up to deliver the villain to the station. It felt like running away far more than he expected. Behind him, he left a young boy, whose oldest dream shattered under the words of his icon. But a second dream was already there, the pieces and focus slowly shifting. He couldn't be a hero? He would just have to change the world, the universe, his way. Inko worried about Izuku. She had been for years. If not the bruises he tried to hide or the lack of him ever speaking about friends to the fact he had never gone to hang out with someone after school other than heading out to work on his dreams. Heroics. A wonderful dream, but a frightening one. Heroes went to great distances and efforts to save lives, and they helped keep people safe. But less spoken of was the news clips that she heard at work, the rumors she picked up as a nurse at the Musafesu Ward Hospital. Missing limbs, broken bones, burns, heroes in comas. Heroes who died. Who sacrificed everything. She sighed and pushed her thoughts away as she opened the door to her and Izuku's apartment. Honey? I'm home, she called, even as she slipped off her shoes and stepped inside. However, she paused when instead of her son's usual call of a greeting and bright, if often strained, smile. Instead, she heard the rapid click-clack of a mechanical keyboard and the faint beat of some loud and aggressive music. Something she heard less and less, and only when Izuku had had a far too stressful day. Oh, honey, she sighed and hung her purse by the door. What's on your mind now? She headed to the kitchen and checked the fridge. She was glad she had taken to keeping an emergency stash of pork for days like this. Katsudon would hopefully cheer up her son. Pulling the pork out to defrost on the counter, she walked down the hall and slowly opened her son's door. The deep rhythm of some very heavy rock was pouring from the opening. Izuku's room had always been an interesting mix of interests, from model spaceships and posters of the universe and space paraphernalia, and his ever-present love of heroes. Shelves of action figures sat next to disassembled bits of mechanics and hand-sketched blueprints. And his computer was covered in hero emblem stickers even as he custom-built the casing and scavenged his own components for it. But as she looked in now, her heart skipped a beat. Sections of the wall that once held shining brightly colored posters were now blank, and an entire section of his action figures were missing, leaving only a few of the more support and science-themed ones left. She focused on her son, who was sitting on the floor, back to his bed frame and hands dancing over the keyboard in his lap. The computer screen projected from above him to the white wall he used as a screen. His hair was disheveled, even more than usual, and his eyes were frightening. Her son's eyes had always held a spark of life that amazed her, a shining, brilliant flame of pure intent to help people. But looking at him now was like seeing that flame changed. It was more intense, she felt, as if her son had moved from simply declaring to the world to challenging it. Izuku. Her voice made her son jolt, and he reflexively tabbed over to his music and hit pause, looking up at her in surprise. Hey, Mom, he smiled, but it was worn and tight. I didn't hear you come in. I can tell, she sighed and moved in, sitting down carefully next to her son, despite the slight ache of her back. Izuku, are you okay? She asked him, placing her hand on her son, her brilliant genius hero of a son. What? And he froze, choking slightly as he tried to respond, before he leaned against her, chest heaving in a half-choking sob. No, I'm not okay. And crying against her side, he told her. He spoke about his day, about his beating and the stress, and the villain attack, and she tried not to have a heart attack about her son being attacked by a villain. And then, in a small voice, Izuku spoke of his icon, the hero he admired above all else, and how that hero crushed his dream. At that moment Inko knew that if she ever got the chance she was going to have words with All Might, Pillar of Peace or not. As the story dried up, and Izuku quieted, she gently caressed his messy green hair. I'm so sorry, honey. What do you want to do now, though? Her son went quiet, and Inko let him think, merely holding him close and comforting him in her hug. Finally, he spoke up, and she smiled at the tone. Not sad. Not angry, but solid. The tone that her son should have. Space. Space, she asked, pushing him to expand his ideas. I want to see the stars. Other planets. The moon. I want to go to space. I have for years. She smiled at the longing in his voice, and despite the fear that sat in her heart, she pushed through. I remember. I thought you decided to put that on the back burner for after you made it big. Well, why wait? Why stop and hold off? They say I can't be a hero, fine. I'll instead be a pioneer. An example that we can go farther than ever before. Inko smiled and leaned down to kiss her son's forehead. I hope you bring me back a star that shines half as bright as you, Izuku. Mum. Her son blushed and hid his face against her side. You can't just say things like that. It's embarrassing. Oh, quiet you. Tell me, what were you working on, He peeked up and smiled. Well. Pushing up, he picked up his keyboard and began typing the projection on his wall, changing from the music player back to what looked like a coding screen. If I want to travel the universe, I'm going to need something for navigation, right? So I'm designing a 6 using one of the custom tutoring and education-based kits online. 6. Oh, a virtual intelligence. It's like a personal secretary that can run basic programs and summarize their results for me. I'm programming this one with a basic star map and how to calculate gravity and paths through space. She smiled at her son and rubbed his shoulder. All right, genius, get up. You're gonna help me make some katsudon. Then you can get back to programming. Grinning, Izuku set his keyboard on his desk. Deal. Izuku laid back in bed and looked out the window. The light pollution of the city hid them from sight, but Izuku could see them when he closed his eyes. The stars, shining bright and vibrant in the night sky, constellations, other planets as faint dots in the sky, the deep shimmering blue-black of space viewed through the atmosphere. He sighed and looked back at the ceiling. It was strange not looking at the posters of All Might, all of which had been very carefully pulled down and rolled up when he was clearing space. Instead, he focused on a blueprint he had sketched almost a year ago, slowly forming it in his head. A line of rings and half-cylinder casings, each noted for specific properties, each with a specific use. Insulators, conductors, reinforcements, aesthetic plating. And a power source. An electromagnetic field generator that would manipulate the rest of it, the overlapping fields spinning and charging the metal, the internal fuel plates sparking into a cold plasma reaction, propelling it forward, even as the metal would be recharged with electrons from the environment. An ion drive. Similar engine designs had been tested and proved more than a century ago as a clean power generator, and there were even a few city power plants powered off the same technology across Europe. But it hadn't been used as an actual propulsion drive engine. He stared at it, years of research and cross-reference designs and fields of science filling his thoughts. If he wanted to get to space, he needed several requirements. Atmosphere control, to survive in a vacuum with extreme temperatures. Propulsion with little to no fuel, to breach orbit and to navigate the local solar system. Artificial gravity to prevent physiological degradation. Navigation, entertainment, and communications equipment, for obvious reasons. And then some form of food and hygiene system. And those are just the major problems. There are also the issues of materials and construction, of figuring out how to pilot and manipulate it, adjusting to the intense speeds, and so many more. Izuku couldn't wait to get started. Across town, someone else's life was soon to make an equally drastic turn. A tall blonde teen paced behind his teacher and boss, the tall and sharp form of Sir Night-Eye. "Mirio, I have someone I want you to meet." "Who is it, sir?" "An old friend of mine." Night-Eye pulled back on the door to reveal the training ground of the agency. "I am here to meet you, young Mirio." "All might?" Musafesu Ward was originally constructed as an expansion of the older Tokyo wards for residential use and was sold as a new place to move and live, where higher-grade technology and dozens of new and improved quirk-compatible apartments were to be constructed. When it first opened, it drew in quite a rush of traffic. The city had once been shining and prosperous, but during the still-developing hero and villain equilibrium that was coming, it was a target. New and improved businesses were often vandalized or stolen from, new apartments were broken into, and the new and attractive features were ripped apart and taken away. By the time Musafesu was celebrating its third decade, it had dropped from an upper-class district of high fashion and advanced development to a middle-class dumping ground for those who could barely afford to live there. Now, almost 140 years after its establishment, Musafesu Ward has settled into the lower middle-class rank. What once was new and advanced technology is now outdated and unused. Dumping grounds and abandoned lots littered the district, drawing in all manner of lost and addicted to wander in its streets, aside from the northern edge closest to Tokyo where UA holds domain. Interestingly enough, 140 years of social decline has also left plenty of strange and unseen places, old businesses that close their windows but not their doors, apartments and strip malls that have turned into self-contained enclaves of the poor and wicked. And then there was the Musafesu Thinker Lab. Less than 20 minutes of walking from the Midoriya apartment, halfway to the dump that Dagoba Beach had become, the old and unfinished carcass of a gorgeous indoor mall remained. A full city block, still lined with old scaffolding behind the 10-foot chain-link fence. It was one of the last great pushes to make an improvement to a neighborhood already half in the gutters, which lost its funding long before finishing. Of the two wings of the complex, only one had been completed, a graveyard of untouched and unfurnished offices, storefronts, and restaurants. Across the unpaved central plaza of the building, the other half was nothing but a skeleton of steel bars. There were several other buildings like this one, grand projects to revitalize a community that sputtered and died, but few were as complete as the Musafesu Grand Mall. With its failure, the southern part of the district had fallen even further into disrepair. Despite that, the mall did not become a hive of scum and villainy as many expected. Instead, a different breed came upon it. The young and ingenious of the area had come to play. Izuku jogged up and slipped through the usual gap in the fence, jogging up to the still intact, if paint-covered, double-glass doors, and tapped a code into the digital lock to the side. With a beep, the door unlocked and Izuku pushed through to a paradise of creative freedom. There's a saying that nothing is more dangerous than a teenager who's time rich and money poor. And for the teens who called the lab a second home, the geeks and curious and too poor or too weak to be heroes, the lab was a place to experiment. Old stores became workshops of scavenged and customized tools, blank utilitarian walls became an evolving and living art show, graffiti and art ranging from the obscene to the elegant to the mad was constantly being added. The original trendsetters, who had long since become grandfathers and grandmothers, still dropped by, hippies with intricate glass and ceramics, grinders with glowing embedded lights under their skin, and tattoos that shifted with electrical current. Tinkers and crafters and artists of all kind gathered under the roof of the lab. And among the top floors, Izuku had his own workshop. It's been 3 weeks since his meeting with All Might. Izuku crouched and looked over his prototype. A miniaturized ion engine, barely larger than his fist, was bolted to a makeshift workbench in the hackerspace. More precisely, it was in the refurbished and reinforced bathroom of the once restaurant Izuku had turned into his workshop. Stepping back, he checked that the camera he had set up was watching and stepped behind a concrete wall. This would be his 4th test after the first 2 never started, and the 3rd spot welded from a conductivity issue. Test fire model 1.2 in 3, 2, click. Izuku tensed and listened as the engine began to whine, the faint smell of ozone and the sharp smell of ionized metal reaching him. He counted to 10, and listened as the engine whined and hummed from behind the wall. Slowly, he peeked out and grinned at seeing the faint blue glow of a successful. The sound suddenly pitched higher and he panicked, ducking back around the wall before. Izuku sighed even as he took in the still glowing hot piece of metal embedded in the wall past his cover. I need safety equipment. Goddamn. Ah, did I miss an explosion? Came a drawling voice as a young man of dark complexion and a short and curly nest of neon blue dyed hair, with deep gray roots, leaned around the door frame behind Izuku. Dark gray eyes peeked from behind thick horn-rimmed glasses even as his eyes darted across the room carefully. Yeah, sorry Bite, but I could have sworn it was ready, Izuku muttered as he face-bombed, smearing a line of grease under his eyes. I also heard you talking about safety gear? Whatever for. Gesturing for the older teen to look, Izuku presented the several centimeters of still smoking metal that was embedded in the wall past the concrete divider. Ouch, what the hell did you do, Green? Make a pipe bomb? Nope. I just spent 2 weeks building the 4th attempt at a pulse ion engine. Izuku sighed as the realization of just how much work he lost set in. And I just lost those 2 weeks of work. God damn it. The older teen blinked and wandered past to look at the damage itself, Izuku following. This is a lot of damage. If I didn't know better, I'd say you could give my cousin a run in the catastrophic failure category. The lower half of the drive was still bolted tight to the workbench, but the upper half had warped to look like an open flower of twisted metal. How'd you fabricate this? He asked, pointing to the larger casing parts. Laser cut the components then adjusted them by hand, Izuku called back, already moving to grab some protective gloves and a pair of pliers from outside of the refurbished bathroom that was his testing ground. Yeah, that's your problem. You need either a more robust design or a more accurate fabricator. Lucky for you, we can solve one of them right now. Bite looked at the younger teen. You need to learn how to 3D model, and then you can use the big box. Izuku looked at him with curiosity. I can use some seed, but what is the big box? Bite threw back his head and laughed, clapping the younger teen on the shoulder. You need to enunciate the capitals in the name. On and see, it's in the basement. I think you've been around long enough to be introduced. The two began heading for the stairs as Bite explained. So, there's a theory that went around a long time ago when 3D printers and fabricators first started. It was the recursive loop theory. It goes like this. You buy a 3D printer. Mid-range, sorta useful, but with enough detail and strength that you like it. But then you need something a bit more detailed. So you look online and you find a set of 3D models for a second printer. This one you can build on your machine, and with only some minor parts you can make the more detailed printer for a tiny fraction of what it would cost. The two of them stepped onto the stairs and began to descend, by taking the steps in slow twirling leaps, while Izuku watched in amusement and paced behind the energetic teenager. So, you can make more detailed parts. And you find designs for a bigger printer. It's modular and sorta rough, but it needs those detailed parts. So you can then build massive somewhat detailed pieces, And so you do. And now, with your 3 printers, you find designs to a 4th. Bigger, better, more detailed, it's another generation, and you can print it off your current designs. Boom, bam, rinse and repeat. Eventually, your diminishing returns drop till you can't make a more detailed printer, but at that point, you have one hell of a machine, particularly if you have a bunch of crazy hackers building your final design as a custom project. Of course, it's not quite that easy. We had to fabricate a lot of weird and unique bits for them in other ways. As they passed the first floor, Byte leaped down the last flight of the steps and spun to the basement door, typing in a code. Izuku could see where this was going. So the Big Box Dash is a massive, customized, high-detail 3D fabricator that can even print metal. Yes. As the door beeped, Izuku saw the big box and had to keep from gasping. It was a massive aquarium tank, easily 20 feet from corner to corner and at least 8 feet tall. Above it, hanging like a mechanical spider on segmented green and red limbs with shiny metal joints and points, was a motorcycle-sized 3D printing extruder. Izuku could see a set of lasers for dust printing, a pair of high-heat, high-speed extruders for wires, several dozen smaller legs with colors and specific grades of wire, all of which fed up and around the room to spools of plastic and cylinders of dusted metal. Around the rooms were notes scrawled in Sharpie, notices about safety, about what feeds to use, hints for setting things up, scrawled DS in a corner, a big bluefish painstakingly drawn across the top of the glass on the tank, which, now that Izuku could see, was clearly hinged to swing open and provide access to the printer and its results. What do you even build with this? Izuku muttered, looking at the size. The biggest single print project I was here for so far is a full-size truck frame with most of the components and the entire electrical system printed inside the frame. That took about 18 days of straight printing and drained the steel and aluminum canisters a solid dozen times. We've done bigger projects, but that's usually modular frame stuff we weld and bolt together. Izuku stood and stared at the printer, dozens of smaller ideas he had written off as too difficult to fabricate suddenly becoming much more feasible. I've got ideas, Byte, he muttered, eyes becoming sharp and matching the devilish mischief in Byte's own eyes. Well, you better get started, Star Kid. You aren't gonna break orbit without momentum. Izuku grinned and bolted for the door, already 3 steps ahead of himself. Byte smiled and mused on the day he had first met the kid. Yo kid, you know the lab's got a lock for a reason, right? Byte called from the steps up to the door, dressed in a massive green jacket and gray beanie. Byte couldn't believe who was trying to hack the door at 3 in the afternoon on a Monday. A kid, who looked only 8 or 9, was glaring at the electronic lock he was halfway through dismantling. I was told the only way in was to get in myself. Byte blinked and frowned. That was not right. The lab was open to anyone who needed it, though space and some supplies were on a first-come, first-served basis. And as far as Byte was informed, there wasn't an age limit, despite what he told Bit. So WH-. Figured. The guy who told you, was he like older than me, red hair, black skin? Yes. Oh, goddammit Spanner. UF-. He was FNG with you. The code's 422537. The kid paused and looked up in confusion even as he typed in the numbers. Doesn't that spell hacker? Smart kid, not many got that. With a click and buzzer sound, the door slid open. Yep. Now, come in and let's chat. Why do you want in anyway? The kid paused and took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as deep green rose to meet warm gray. I'm going to space. Byte paused and grinned. He knew the kid was interesting. A dream like that? He could get behind it. You know what? Go for it, kid, and shoot me a selfie when you pull it off. How old are you anyway? With a blinding smile, the green-haired teen walked into the lab. I'm 11. Shaking off the memories with a smile, Byte headed back upstairs to his own workshop. And his screen printer. He had some more shirt ideas, including one with, if you can read this, USCK, under that old American patriot guy. He paused as he reached the top floor and passed. The sound of clicking and the sight of Izuku with his eyes stuck to the laptop in front of him made him slow his pace. Safety gear, yeah? He mused, before heading further down the hall to his own workshop, the windows into the old storefront covered with layers upon layers of shirt designs. Better make him something with some style. Mirio stepped into the secure conference room where All Might had called him, to see the number one hero sitting on one of the two comfortable armchairs. Please come sit. Mirio complied and sat across from the hero. What do you want to talk to me about, sir? Young Mirio, over the last month, you have been training with me, and I've been assessing you and your personality, your drive. I think it's time for me to explain why. Sir, let me tell you of one for all. Izuku sighed as he pushed his goggles up out of his face, looking out from behind the now reinforced testing room. The metal shutters that had been installed pulled open to reveal the lower half of the newest engine was still a glowing yellow twisted mess of molten metal and burned-out circuitry. Oh, that's 2.9 Fed. He swore as he reached up and rubbed at the gritty feeling in his eyes. He paused and looked at his phone, feeling a sense of, oh god damn it, I'm late. He pulled the plug on the engine and bolted back through the workshop, grabbing his bag and Gakurin jacket as he rushed for the doors. He had come in early to pick up the latest printing and test it, and now he had to run across the district to get to class on time. Cursing, he hit the street and broke out into a sprint. He was stressed, his nerves raw and emotional grip thin and loose, he knew it. But he was close. What was the worth of sleep and sanity compared to the breakthrough he could see on the horizon? Bakugo glanced back as he heard the faint muttering of the goddamn nerd once more. His head was down and pencil darting across the page he had. It was a free PRD, and the rest of the extras were chatting or working on homework around the room, and the teacher was watching. But he could still hear the goddamn muttering. Just faint enough to hear, but not understand past the faint ringing that he used to in his skull. Gritting his teeth, he decided then and there. The nerd was getting it today. As the final bell rang, he and his cronies dragged the nerd to the courtyard. Izuku stumbled back, and Katsuki felt that surge of power, that thrill. He was better. He was the best, and there was nothing that shitty Deku could do. Look at him, bleeding, hurting. And he thought he could be a hero. Deku thought he was competition? Heh, shitty Deku. You'll never be a hero. The laugh felt natural. After all, the idea that a quirkless loser could be a hero? That was the definition of a joke. The greenette staggered up, braced against the wall and coughed. More weakness, more proof that Katsuki was better, that he was, you know what, Kakin. You're right. And with those words, Bakugo's world froze. Not even looking at him, Deku chuckled, the sound rough and choked. Yeah, you're right. I will never be a hero. Twisting, Deku leaned heavily against the wall, the bruise blossoming across his cheek only highlighting the split lip and bloody smile. You win. The words are what he's always wanted to hear, for years. The one thing Deku has never given him. For some reason they make his blood run cold. I forfeit. I yield. I abandon my dream, surrender my goal, abdicate my future. I give up. A cough, and a spit, blood staining the gray of the concrete, even as Izuku raised his arms wide and shaky. Open as if gesturing to the world. You win. And boom, one less hero. One less roadblock. And there's a smile. Wide, and shining and shaking. But with the blood from his lips smeared across white teeth, it becomes a thing of nightmares, burning into Bakugo's mind. Yeah, there you go. One step closer to number one, right? One less step, one less roadblock. Only took what, 10 years? One less hero. I'll retire without starting, just like you want. The words ring in Katsuki's head, and he almost wants to talk but his tongue feels heavy. And when Izuku staggers to the side, he flinches and doesn't stop the nerd as he grabs his bag, slinging it over his shoulders with a sigh, not even looking Katsuki's direction. I really hope you make it, Bakugo. Would hate to see my sacrifice go to waste. Have fun being number one. Hope it's FNG worth it. Bakugo can only stare even as his cronies begin to joke behind him as Deku walks off. He's won. So why doesn't it feel like it? Izuku doesn't go home after his beating. After feeling his last threads of patience and the last bit of leeway he had for Katsuki's snap under that beating. So with his pulse still pounding, the edges of his eyes tinting red with each beat of his heart, He heads for the lab. The code gets slammed into the keypad, the rest of the walk from school to the building lost in the blur. And his feet rush up the stair. Up past the 3rd floor where he is set up to still vacant and unused 4th. And then past that. Up a back door with appealing employee-only sign, and out onto the roof. His bag makes a satisfying thud as it soars across the pale concrete tile of the rooftop. F-. He yells, shouts. He needs to simply release. Weeks of stress and exhaustion are catching up, and his already frayed temper and patience had snapped under his beating. He stands and breaths heavy, looking at the rooftop and the edge nearby, thrown into sharp contrasts as the sun was falling towards the distant glimmer of the sea. Izuku finally falls to his knees and slams his fists to the floor, before rolling to his back, arm coming up to cover his eyes, gleaming tears still down his cheeks as he trembles on the roof. A floor below, sitting against the wall next to the roof access, face drawn tight with a mix of anger and sorrow, Bite wishes he could do something. Anything. Nothing he can do comes to mind. Izuku doesn't need pity. Or a shoulder to cry on. He would instantly repress it the moment Bite came up, and he doesn't need that. So Bite closes his eyes and slams his head back in helplessness. It's not until he hears the solid clack of wooden and steel sandals on tile and swish of heavy cloth that he looks up. His eyes go wide as the door is kicked open past him and a determined flow of gray and black and red passes him by. He gets a glimpse of tan skin so thick and aged it looks like leather, of sharp gray eyes and a thick white beard and mane. And an expression that seems to be both comforting and threatening at the same time. OF-. Yeah, now Bite really wasn't going up there. Izuku doesn't pull his arm away as he hears the door open. Oh my god, can you just leave me alone? Just for a few minutes. What, so you can mope some more? Comes a gruff voice he didn't expect. He scrambles to sit up, eyes wide as he takes in the oldest and most mysterious member of the lab's inhabitants. Most of the people who worked, or lived, in the labs were on the younger side. People who were just a bit tilted, who were too hyper-focused to live in the structure of normal society. Except for him. Old Man Tetsu, or as it normally went around, Tetsudano. He was supposedly one of the main supporters of the labs, and aside from his own workshop, a blacksmith's forge set on the ground floor and spilling out into the old courtyard of the second floor, he was rarely seen around the labs themselves. Now he stood on the roof. A loose hakama in pale tan and trimmed with deep steel-colored gray, and a deep red kimono with scrawling black designs that brought to mind wrought iron. Gray-streaked black hair was pulled back and up into a spiky tail while his beard was pulled tight into a long braid of white, capped with an ornate steel ring. Dragging on the chains of his anger, Izuku dropped into a bow. Oh, Tetsudano If I wanted you to bow to me, I would have invited you to tea. Stand up, kid. The sharp voice cut through Izuku's flimsy attempt at respect. Something in the tone also set those chains he held shifting, his rage and frustration boiling even as he tried to tighten his grip on it. I could hear your ranting from the ground floor. Despite what you people may think, age has done nothing but sharpen my hearing. As such, I gather you've had a shitty day. A link slipped, and his mouth moved before he could stop it. You could say that. Deep hazel eyes narrowed, and then an arm swung up, a long pale object being launched Izuku's way. He fumbled for a second, but caught it, revealing a sturdy wooden rod, unstained wood pale and rough, shaped almost like a katana. You want to mope and sulk, you do it off the lab. But if you need to release some rage and frustration, leathery hands rose, a second bakken in a sure grip. Then I suppose I should teach you how to channel it. Some deep-seated sense told him caution. In answer, he shifted to awkwardly holding the hilt and stepping back into the side, bringing the stick up more like a baseball bat than a sword. I have no idea how to use a sword, Izuku confesses slowly, feeling extremely foolish. That much I can see. A better idea with using it than faking it. And then the old man blurred and Izuku could barely react, jerking the bakken around to meet the incoming slash with a jarring hit that threw it clear. But your stance is weak and your movements too close. Again. A shifting stance and another blur, the bakken flying. Again. Blur, thunk, bakken gone. Again. Izuku shifted to hold the Bakken better. Again. Shifted to grimace as his palms were scrapped from his grip. Again. The sun was low, casting light across the rooftop at a harsh angle. And Izuku grimaced, grabbing the Bakken. And any grip on the chain holding his anger finally slipped. He stepped forward, swinging the wooden sword with a lack of grace and a surplus of anger, and for once, it stayed in his grip. The other sword darted out, tracing along the rage-filled swing and sending it wide, but Izuku wasn't done yet. He swung back around, and the sword came at the old man again, and eventually, the man spoke again. Finally, you're letting it go. But where is your intelligence? Where does your mind go with this aggression? Focus. Let your anger flow, but direct it. Your swings are wild, chaotic. Focus them, bring them in on the inhale. Strike on the exhale. Through the haze, Izuku listened and learned, and as he focused, he began to put it into practice. The sounds of Bakken striking got louder and louder, faster and faster. Izuku lost track of time, his anger fading from a blur to a simmer that rested in his bones and blood. Finally, he stumbled, and a flicker flash of movement sent the Bakken flying. Crashing to his knees, Izuku gasped and pulled in deep, ragged breaths. His body burned from exertion, legs and arms feeling as though acid had been filtered through them even as his hands were scratched raw and torn, bright red blood slowly seeping from ripped skin. A grizzled hand rested on his shoulder gently as Tetsu crouched before him. All semblance of the stern fighter faded from his expression. Kid, trust me. You're gonna feel like this again. People are gonna meet your eye and tell you that you're gonna fail. And do it again and again and again. But you are a dreamer, and your eyes are trained on the stars. If you seal off and ignore your rage, then one day it will gonna burst out and break you. But if you feed your dreams your rage, your spite, all those negative emotions turn into force, into energy that you direct. Why? I understand. Izuku painted, trying to focus. Wonderful. Now, I want you to schedule a day or two a week with me. Come by and spar just like what we did. You're gonna need to be strong if you want to fly. Reaction times, focus, grace under pressure. I can help you with those. And teach you how to use a sword. The old man's voice was grounding Izuku, pulling him back down to his center. But Tetsu held up a hand and listen. You need the DSPLN to balance your dreams. And the sword may help you more than you expect. Izuku quieted at that, and part of his mind reviewed his criteria for space, adding in physical conditioning. He needed to get stronger, and Tetsu was offering. I would be honored, Tetsuma. For a moment the two shared a moment of unspoken understanding. Then the door burst open and a young woman with long teal hair pulled back in a loose bun and a terrifying smile stepped on the roof. Why did I hear that someone was getting injured? Epsilon, the lab's resident nurse, and their medical expert asked with a smile and closed eyes. Across from her, the teen and old man froze, feelings of XPLCT terror growing as they broke out into cold sweats. From behind the door frame, Bite leaned out and shouted across the roof. Oh, you done effed up now. Come on. Just spark and spin, give me that spark and spin. Izuku gave the engine a last surge of power from the controller, and it started whirring. After 3 seconds of accelerating with a slowly heightening pitch, it burst to life. A flare of blue gold bloomed in the inner workings, and beneath his new work gear, Izuku laughed as he could feel the energy coursing through it, the active electromagnetic field raising the hair off his arms. Yes, 3.5 is live. Grinning, he pulled the switch to begin the engine's shutdown, the glow sputtering and fading, leaving only a sense of static floating off the metal engine. He would have to check to see how the engine degraded if it did, but he wanted to let it rest first. Stepping back, he reached up and unclasped the base of his new helmet from the armored seal over his throat. The gleaming gray and black helmet was fairly smooth and form-fitting, except for a respirator installed around the mouth and the gleaming green and gold-tinted glass used for the lenses. Pulling it off, he reached up to rub at the new haircut he sported, the short cut of his sides giving way at the crown of his head to flowing spikes that he had combed forwards. The benefit of keeping it out of the way since Engine 3.2 had involved his curly bush of green locks getting lit on fire during construction, which taught him to not keep hair loose while soldering, which was part of why he had been very determined to finish his first helmet prototype. Running his hand through his hair to loosen it from where it was stuck close around his temple, he looked around his workshop. Over 3 months of day-in and day-out work. Of long nights spent coding and designing, and rushing his homework in the small hours of the morning before dozing in class. His agreement with his mom for this meant he had to keep his grades up, and the print time on the big box meant that he had plenty of time to research and double-check his work while it brought designs to life. But when school was done, when he could get away, he had poured his time into his designs and experiments. And when summer break had begun 2 weeks ago, he had devoted even more time into his dream. And that was what had led to this, the breakthroughs of the version 3 engine. The version 3 engines were a mixed arc electromagnetic adjustable yield ion thruster. When he had been ranting to Byte earlier that month, the older teen had stared at him and raised an eyebrow. As such, he had to clarify. The version 1 engines were a set-yield propulsion system. It accepted a certain amount of energy and output a specific amount of move. The version 2 engines were a responsive yield thruster, where the amount of energy put in affected the amount of move they generated. Which meant that when he did his final stress tests, the engine almost ripped free of its housing and the energy burned out its circuits when the energy spiked. But the IT engines were monitored and could be adjusted. For now, it was manual, a stripped-down series of switches and buttons that could adjust the levels of move and power used. The plan was to eventually wire them up with a short-range Arduino and computer interface that would allow him to adjust them from a ranged controller or from his laptop. But for now, the fact it worked was enough for celebration. He smiled and unplugged the car battery and supercapacitor he was using for power from the engine. That was his next project to work on energy generation and recovery. The ion engines once started, used a fairly small amount of energy for the move, but beginning the reaction was much more difficult, requiring a massive surge of electricity to begin the reaction and create the electromagnetic field. It was almost 15 times the wattage that maintaining the field required, hence the supercapacitor. But that wasn't viable for field use. He needed a better, cleaner method of energy production. He was also sort of sick and tired of hunting down and recharging car batteries from Dagoba Beach. As evidenced when a check revealed he had killed yet another one. Probably why it was so hard to start the engine, Izuku muttered, grabbing the 15-kilo box, heaving the battery to the far corner of the workshop, and setting it gently on the growing pyramid of spent batteries sitting under a counter. I used to need 2 hands for that. Honestly, that was one of the more interesting changes that he had undergone. Months of constant work and crafting had a series of surprising benefits. From hours spent digging through the junkyard of the Dagoba Beach under the summer sun, running to and from school, home, and the lab as fast as he could, sprinting up the stars, and carrying large and heavy metallic objects. Swinging bokkens and releasing his stress and frustrations with Tetsu, who had also started teaching him some meditation and exercises for clearing his mind. Baby fat that once rounded his cheeks and the thin, weak flesh of his young frame was vanishing bit by bit. While he doubted he'd acquire a 6-pack of washboard abs and muscles that could bend steel, he was becoming leaner and more wiry with each passing day. His skin darkened several shades from sunshine and heat as he worked metal and hunted down spare parts and specific materials for his use. Alongside that, his hands and arms had long since suffered from his mistakes. Small cuts and bruises from working metal pieces and carrying junk, small burns from welding and hot metal, calluses from the same. The bruises and cuts were rarer as time went on, but it seems burns were an eternal presence, which the other tinkerers had agreed on. Grinning at his progress, he unbolted the engine and set it next to the other 4 models of the Generation 3 engines. Then his phone beeped. A glance showed his alarm was going off. 11:25 p.m. Oh shit! A glance out the bay windows across the hall showed that the day had vanished under the horizon without him noticing, the stars and night sky covered by the glow of street lamps and neon. Grabbing his helmet, phone, and his most recent acquisition, a refurbished skateboard that Byte had fixed up and painted with a stylized solar system on the bottom, Izuku bolted for the door. The skateboard, along with the finished prototype of the helmet and the matching leather work jacket, had been Izuku's birthday presents from a half-dozen members of the lab. Bite, who was the artist of the group, had done the bottom of the board, and the subtle paintings that filled the lining of the jacket, Cherenkov blue paint lighting up the inside as if it was filled with the ion glow of Izuku's engines. The left shoulder had a stitched patch of an gold and black H superimposed over the corona of the sun peeking around the earth, the defining picture of a horizon. Solo, who was the resident drone enthusiast, had helped design the collar seal, which would lock the helmet tight to Izuku's throat and cover his neck from sparks and danger. The leather jacket itself had been recovered from a thrift store and fitted to Izuku by the tailor of the building, Singh, who had been working with Izuku before that. To complete his outfit, he had a new pair of close-fitting leather gloves, each with the H symbol stitched into them, a gift from Epsilon and Tetsu. Something about keeping him from tearing up his hands again, from the cheerful medic's comments. As he checked himself over once more, he pulled his helmet back on and started heading home, enjoying the cool summer night. As he kicked off and drifted through the quiet streets. As she drifted, he heard a rising trill from his helmet's audio. "I'm here. Navi. Hello, user. There have been 3 reported hero fights this evening, and traffic is still obstructed on your route home." Shit. "Give me a reroute," he asked, reaching up to flip the antenna in the side of the helmet up for a better signal. He heard the faint click of the GPS system turning on, and clicked the button to grant access for his 6. "As you wish, user." Spaced around the edges of the visor in the helmet, a dozen soft gold LED lights flickered on, then off, before only the lights to the left came on. Tilting his head, he turned to follow the light, taking each turn as the lights flashed. Soon he was traveling down unused back alleys, rolling slowly of the board until with a slow, smooth turn, he came out of an alley on the far side of the damaged area. Kicking. Off he picked up speed and tapped the switch on the helmet's inner jaw. "Thanks, Navi," Izuku called out, kicking the skateboard up as he hit the stairs up to his apartment. "You are welcome, user. Please resume local celestial mapping." Resuming primary protocol. Izuku checked that the helmet was turned off, and pulled it off with a grunt as he stepped out onto his landing. Jogging, he slid to a stop and pulled out his key. Carefully he opened the door and stepped inside, seeing the faint light of a dimmed lamp illuminating the living room. And his mom, fast asleep on the couch. Sighing to himself, he set his skateboard on the hook near the door, and stepped carefully through the room, crouching near his mom. It struck him, suddenly, how she had changed. She was so small. Not weak. The person who thought his mom was a weak woman would get a hell of a surprise, but she looked worn. There were more lines across her face, more worries in her eyes. She hid it well, but even sleeping like this, she looked worried. Worried for him. Izuku sighed and bit at his lip, before pushing the thought away and carefully gathering her in his arms. Again, he was surprised at just how easy it was to carry the weight of his mom, the contrast to who he was just a few months ago evident once more. Carefully, he walked through the apartment, pushing gently into his mom's room. He didn't like being in here. His mom had memories in here, memories that weren't his to pry into. The people in the pictures. He recognized a few. Mitsuki, her husband Masaru. And in a few, the dark curly hair he could recognize, even if he barely remembered. A wedding photo, a picture from an early date. Each one of these, his father smiled and grinned, goofy and carefree. He looked away and focused on getting his mom into bed, tucking her in, careful not to wake her. Stepping back, he turned to walk away before another picture caught his eye, sitting on a table by the door. Green curly hair and bright eyes closed on a small Izuku. The toddler was fast asleep, sprawled over a much taller, leaner chest in a bright red shirt. Deep black curly hair sprawled unattended like a halo around the figure's head, while a pair of glasses was askew on the figure's face. A line of drool clearly showed how fast asleep the older of the pair was. Reaching out, Izuku ran a finger over the frame, pulling away a faint film of dust. He could remember when he left. When his job, the corporation he had worked for years in, closed its Japanese branch, and the incentives he was given to follow. But he didn't want to uproot everyone. Not his wife or his son. So Izuku's father left, to pursue work and time, to keep people safe. Quietly, Izuku wondered if the Island project was really that important. If his dad had stayed close. Izuku sighed and gave a soft smile and picked up the picture, carrying it from his mom's room where he slid to sit in the hall, looking at the picture. I wonder if you'd like. My dear, I know you're so bound up and busy that you keep people, millions of them, safe. A hero by a different name. Izuku grinned and was about to put the picture back when he noticed something. The light shifted over the picture oddly, as if it wasn't quite flush with the glass. What do we have here? Flipping the frame around, he quickly loosened the backing and pulled it out, to reveal a thick business card. Scrawled on the back facing here, in red ink, is the phrase, "If things go wrong." On the front in small clear-cut typeset, was the address of his dad's old labs. Below was a series of numbers and Lab 18. A thought came over him. What had ever happened to the old Morningstar research labs? I mean, it had been over a decade, right? Frowning, he pocketed the card and put the picture frame back together. Now he was curious. Professor Midoriya. Dark hair and red eyes glanced up from his computer, thick glasses catching the glint of the light as he took in the blonde teenage girl approaching. Ah, Melissa. Good to see you. He folded his hands together and looked up at the young prodigy. With a smile and focused blue eyes, she stepped closer. I was wondering if you could give me some advice. I'm working on trying to lessen the energy demands of my gliders, and was hoping you could help. Hisashi Midoriya grinned and shoved up from the desk, reaching out to close his laptop. You know what, sure. Might as well earn my position as head of our energy division here. Come on, let's go see what you're working on. As Melissa turned to leave, Hisashi glanced at his phone on the desk and scowled at the email still pulled up on it. Due to security and protocol, outbound package MH1164 to Midoriya Izuku was not shipped and shall be returned to you by August. Sorry for the inconvenience. Security Chief Hammond. Tapping to close his email app, he slid the phone in his pocket. Hisashi picked up the pace to follow his student, breathing slowly to keep the agitated sparks of heat sliding around in his lungs, not his breath. Hopefully helping Melissa would keep him from lighting the building on fire. So, I'm sorry for missing another birthday. I wish I could see you. Izuku shifted, his jacket sitting across his shoulders loosely and helmet in hand as he rushed to the door. Bye, Mom. I'm heading out. Be safe. Call me if you plan to be late again. Inko called back, smiling from her seat at the kitchen table as she took in her son's hurried expression while he yanked on his work boots over the hems of his black jeans. A wide and genuine smile is sent her way before his hands finish tying his boots snug and he grabs his board on the way out the door, footsteps ringing out as he takes off. That boy always running off. She breathed out a sigh and smiled softly. She compared the lean and bright-eyed teen to the smaller, far more nervous kid he had once been. I wouldn't have it any other way. Izuku paused on the street corner and glanced up, his face wincing guiltily at what he planned to do. Shaking it to clear his thoughts, he pulled out his phone and tapped in the address he had been looking for. With a soft blinking light on, he pulled his helmet onto his head. Good morning, user. Plotting new location now. Plotting complete. Please follow the arrows for the fastest and safest path to the Morningstar Labs. Thanks, Navi, and give me some music to fit the ride. Of course, user. As the low thump of punk rock began to ring out, Izuku kicked off and began his travels. It was over 15 kilometers to the labs, and he wanted to get there with plenty of time to explore this. Just in case, message. 2 bus rides later, he was stepping off the platform and walking down the street of the old manufacturing and packing district of Mizudafu, helmet sealed tight and hands tucked into his jacket as his board coasted down deserted factory side streets and between old warehouses. Finally, he rounded a corner and came into sight of an old-school manufacturing plant and attached office buildings, a rusting sign with the Morningstar logo barely visible. The metal bars of the gate were chained shut, a rust-covered padlock holding it tight. A few moments of twisting, however, and the tension cracked a chain link, the entire pile of metal sliding free with a creaking clang. Glancing around and wincing under his helmet, Izuku shoved the gate open enough to get in and darted through, ducking closer even as he glanced at the business card he had found. Loading Bay 3, Lab 18, passcode 418171514. Really, Dad? Dragon in numerals? Izuku shook his head and took off, eyes checking each faded number on the loading bay doors of the building, circling around to the back of the building before he finally found the one he was looking for. Carrying his skateboard, he stepped up onto the loading bay ledge and tried to lift the door, grunting as it slowly and, to his surprise, silently, slid up several feet. A crouched shuffle left him on the inside, the dark and gloomy factory floor stretching out before him, only lit by the faintest of early morning sunlight that trickled in through skylights. Each step left marks in the deep dust that covered the floor, while the few remaining manufacturing machines were all covered in dust and moth-eaten cloth covers. Reaching up, he slid the helmet off, stashing it and his board in his backpack, while pulling out a large flashlight. A click, and the beam illuminated the room around him, the flashlight passing over the walls as he started looking for the labs. Well, if this is the factory floor, where are the labs? Izuku took off walking through the factory floor, light dancing from place to place as he made for the partitioned-off rooms across the way. As he reached them, he found a security door and a keypad with a softly blinking red light. Tada. Izuku smirked as his fingers typed in the code before the light changed green and the lock gave a click. Pushing through the door, the hallway he stepped into was far darker than the factory floor itself, if with less dust. He paced down the hall, light flickering over the room numbers as he frowned. 0102. Where's 18 though? The building's only one floor, and less. Glancing down, Izuku eyed the floor and jogged down the hall, glancing in each lab window he passed until he found it. An emergency exit on the wrong side of the hall. The wall the rooms were built against was to his left. So why was the emergency exit to his right? He crouched down and looked at the door's bar, seeing that while it was an actual emergency door, nothing was hooked up, the sensors were not giving off that distinctive hum of an active current, nor were the signs in the hall right. Breathing deep, he slowly cracked the door open, revealing a metal and concrete staircase, leading down under the factory floor. Hello, somehow I don't think you're supposed to exist? Izuku glanced at the rough-poured concrete support, at how the stairwell was slightly off-kilter. Things that could be contributed to a poor foundation, if not for the fact the concrete wasn't cracked or tilted. This wasn't aged. This was poor construction. The type of things that would happen if, you hired someone under the table. What were you up to, Dad? What's with the secrecy? Izuku sat in the doorway for a moment, pulling at his lip as his light slowly danced over the dark hallway. Mama didn't raise a quitter. Lifting his light higher, Izuku delved into the secret labs. Katsuki! The shout echoed up the stairs, and Bakugo Katsuki flinched, looking up from the textbook in his hand, pencil behind his ear. He had meant to study some more for the entrance exam, but for the last half hour he had barely had the focus. All he could think about was that phrase. That parting comment. Hell. Katsuki, get your butt down here. His mom shouted up once more and he scowled, tossing his book aside. Fine, what do you want, Eti? Behind him, a notebook still sat open, the word, forfeit, scrawled with a question mark in the margins of the last page. His light danced over the labs as Izuku walked through the hallway. Most of the room doors were open, and the interiors stripped of gear, leaving only loose cables and wires, but as he trailed the light over large painted decals of numbers, he saw that one door was still sealed shut, with a blinking light on its keypad. 12, 14, 16, 18, he counted out, eyes confirming that his luck was right. 18 had the sealed door. Walking up, he looked at the keypad, and typed in the same code as earlier. A chime, and the door clicked open. He paused and took a long breath before pushing through the entry. His light danced across clean white walls and tiled floors. In the center, an old metal desk with a computer sat, facing away from him. Behind the desk, the far wall was covered with 4 locked vault doors, each one sealed tight. I wonder what's in here. Izuku closed the door behind him and rounded the desk, tapping at the keyboard to see if it was just sleeping, before reaching down and pressing the power button to the computer. With a loud whirring it began to boot up, the screen, under a thick layer of dust, began to light up, green and black lines and rows of code and executed commands scrolling down the screen. With a simple tone, the screen shifted to a blank white background with an entry code. Izuku paused. Let's see. Dragon? Wrong password, try again. He frowned. Let's try. Numeric. Wrong password, try again. Ugh. Izuku paused. And then slowly started typing once more. Wrong password, try again. Izuku. Wrong password, try again. Izuku scowled and looked at the desk in annoyance before he saw it, half hidden under a layer of dust. A post-it note. Carefully, he wiped it off and looked at what had been written in a fast scrawl. A faintly familiar handwriting he had seen in the rare letter or old note. Term of a reaction that continues unaided by the scientist. Izuku blinked and his hands were moving before he could even say the word. Cascading. Welcome user. Izuku froze, blinking back tears and glancing away as the screen changed to a black desktop with rows of file. Some were titled patents or research logs, some were project names, marked by brackets and all caps. There was a journal folder. And then in the center of the screen was a pair of video files pinned to the desktop. To Izuku and to Inko. For a moment Izuku could only stare, blinking back tears and biting at his fist. 10 years. These two files have been sitting here waiting for almost 10 years. Taking a deep shuddering sigh, he moved the mouse and clicked on the file addressed to him. A video player opened, and after a moment to buffer a video began playing. Midoriya Hisashi, shaggy dark hair pulled back in a short curly ponytail, glasses pushed up to his forehead as he rubbed at his eyes. His face was covered with a dark 5 o'clock shadow and he looked tired. Damn it. I had a list of things to say but... He sighed and pulled the glasses off. Guess I should start at the beginning. Hi son. I'm sorry that you are watching this. Preferably I'd be able to tell you myself and then delete this message. But recent laws being passed. The Support Restriction Act. Izuku knew about the Support Restriction Act. He and the entirety of the lab knew about it. The regulation that limited dozens of patents and drains of technology to official support items and government projects. It had been a response to a series of high-profile villains with exceedingly powerful quirks and support gear. And while it was rarely invoked, it was the reason that half of Izuku's designs were technically illegal, either because they could be classed as support-level gear, or because some of the underlying principles were restricted. Due to this, a lot of researchers and engineers are being recruited, somewhat forcefully. They are calling it the I-Island program. A long sigh. They, really want me. As in, are all but demanding that me and the rest of my team join up. And with multiple companies, Japan included, supporting the program, there's not a lot of wiggle room. I left this for you and your mom so that they don't get my personal research. The rest of the labs are being cleared out by the teams right now as it is. I still own the building myself, so it won't go away or anything, which is why I'm somewhat comfortable leaving this for you and your mom. If things get bad, or you need money, you can sell them off. But the patent paperwork is still good, and will be for a few decades, and the designs are all on the computer. The vaults behind me hold the last generations of prototypes. And a few special things I'm proud of. I only hope that you find some use for them, and remember, you are my greatest gift, my son. The screen went black, and Izuku sat back heavily in the chair. Then he heard a click, the vaults behind him turning from locked to open. As he turned, the center one slowly swung out, revealing a bright green-blue glow. Sitting in it, a device barely larger than his fist, what looked like self-contained arcs of green and blue lightning encased in glass glowed majestically. What the actual F, Dad? Yo, Star Kid? You in here? Bite glanced around the front of Izuku's workshop, ducking under a series of scale model 3D prints of spaceships and one of a fairly cool ring-style space station that hung above him in a deconstructed web of parts. The rest of the familiar workshop was spread before him, sections of counters and work tables covered in fragments of metal and sheets of paper, from sketches and blueprints to a half-dozen notebooks and clear plastic marker boards that rested against counters and hung on walls, colorful designs and formulas spread across them. Leaning around a corner into the back half of the lab, He found Izuku with his computer. Green curly undercut was pressed flat against the wall behind him, eyes closed and body slumped on a counter as 3 computer screens illuminated the scene. Izuku's research computer, a beast of a thing with some insane processing power and over 40 terabytes of memory, sat running at a desk across from where the teen was passed out. At his side, a pair of laptops sat, the slow green lights blinking on them proof that they were merely sleeping or locked. As Byte strolled across the cluttered workshop, he blinked. I could have sworn he only had 1 laptop. Why does he have 2? As he got closer, he blinked at seeing a familiar piece of tech sitting on a counter, a Wi-Fi modem and antenna from a laptop. And beyond that, across the counter beyond Izuku was a black metallic tool chest with a combination padlock on it. Taking all of it in, Byte reached up, rubbed his eyes, and swore under his breath. "Kid, wake up." With a shout, Izuku jerked up and off the counter, crashing to the floor in a pile of limbs and a chair that was next to him. Godf. Byte leaned over the counter. "Zuku, you've been holed up in your lab for the last 4 days. Either explain what the hell you are working on, or I'm gonna grab Epsilon and make you do a checkup." Izuku froze, face pale from the threat. Began to explain. Mirio, my boy. How are you doing today? Is the regime working out?" All Might, form currently reduced to his thinner self, eyed the thick muscle and arms of his successor as he performed push-ups at the Night Eye Hero Agency. "I'm doing great, All Might, sir. I think I'm almost at the point you suggested for me to inherit." The wide smile was more natural now. Less strained than it once looked after the offer was first made. The passing of time had calmed the young hero and let him come to terms with the fate he was offered. "If I remember correct, as a second-year UA student you have a month-long end-of-semester break starting in March, correct?" "Yes, I'm looking forward to it." With a soft smile, Mirio looked down, hands fidgeting slightly as he thought about him and his friend's plans. With a puff of steam, Yagi took his more muscular form, then looked forward to it even more. "I plan to teach you how to use my quirk during that time. 4 months and counting," he shouted, flexing and posing. Mirio hesitated, before smiling brightly. "Of course, All Might, sir." Byte stared at the glowing cube of crystal and metal designs. "So, what is it?" "A capacitor." Izuku rubbed at his eyes, deep bags still prominent even after sleeping for the last few hours. "Though, that's understating just how insane this thing is." "So it's energy storage. How much?" Byte leaned in to see the slowly shifting arcs of electricity which seemed to be slowly filtering through the crystal's inner layers around a pair of black metal rods. Those electrical arcs are apparently actual FING lightning strikes. Izuku glared at the capacitor, the crippled wireless-free laptop on his legs clicking as he turned it around to show a short video of a lightning strike hitting the capacitor as it hung above a building. And the bolt of power just vanishing. "Dude, what the F-dash?" It's a crystalline hyperconductive surface with insane energy storage thresholds. The outer coating is a resin that's a near-perfect insulator, and the metallic system inside is precision power regulator. Those lightning bolts have sat in it for a decade, and so far I have seen little to no degradation or leakage compared to my dad's records. Izuku groaned as he snagged the cube from the counter and set it aside, turning to a paper-thin rolled up a sheet of black hexagons bordered in thin gold borders. "And this is nearly as FNG crazy." Rolling out the sheet, the hexagon pattern extended across the entire thing, with only a thin rod-like end on one side breaking the pattern. "And what is this?" "Micro-solar cell arrays. With 64.5% efficiency, solar to electrical conversion. Less than 5% less than the theorized maximum input you can get through the atmosphere. The issue is that the cells are thin and fairly fragile, unless you place them behind a conductive resin-like dash." He pulled out a sealed container, setting it next to the cells. "This one. Efficiency drops to around 57%, which still nearly doubles standardized photovoltaic cells." Honestly, Byte wasn't sure he was awake, or if he was dreaming. The kid, the youngest member of the lab, the insane young genius, had gotten military-grade power systems. "What the hell are you going to do with it, Izuku?" For a moment, Izuku looked away, before, sliding the maimed laptop aside and waking up his PC. Close the curtains and turn off the lights. Frowning at the shift of mood, Bite darkened the room, turning back to see a large table was just cleared off and colorful lights shone from 8 points, 4 around the table edges, and 4 from the ceiling down. With a flicker, a hologram took place, and Bite could only stare in confusion, and then with wide eyes and loose jaws as he figured out what he was looking at. What the hell is this? This? Izuku grinned in the dark, eyes tracing the long smooth shape and its series of thrusters and clamps. This is a testing rig. It's a hoverboard, kid, and isn't most of that sheet illegal? Bite paced around the design, looking at sleek lines and curves. Actually, there's something funny about that. There's exemptions written into the law, amendments and such, and one of them happens to be by a sports and recreation company. What? Izuku tapped at a few buttons and a series of folders opened, 3 more designs and a text document floating in the air. A helmet, a full-body suit, a pair of high-tech boots, and a legal amendment to a law. If I fly this while on it, then it falls under the X Games exemption from 3 years ago. It's considered a powered sporting vehicle, not an illegal rocket or drone. Izuku, are you serious? Half the time your engines burn out, you barely understand your dad's research, and the speeds and G-force that board would put you under could kill Y-. I know, a shout cut off Bite's building rant, Izuku pushing off his computers and running his hand through his curly locks as he paced towards the window, pushing the curtain wide as he looked out over the few buildings before the coast and at the rising sun coming up over the ocean. I know that this is insane. You think I haven't know that? The voice was soft and hoarse as Izuku rested his hand on the window, his frame cast in sunlight as he looked out. I ran through every bit of legislation, every ruling and judgment for and against the support restrictions in the last week. I feel like I'm running out of time, Bite. That the world is going to put up more red tape and that the stars are getting further and further away. Bite closed his eyes and sat back against the counter, eyes closing in anger as he saw. Streams of tears drip from Izuku to the ground. Heroes, villains. They made the government afraid, made people forget that we were once explorers. We got so caught up in the changes upon us, that we forgot the changes we were pushing to make to the rest of the universe. Space flights and falling satellites and dozens of expeditions to the rest of the universe, cancelled. Japan was going to be there. We were on the cutting edge, the front of the pack. There was a race, a push. And then quirks happened and we got so caught up in the craze we looked away from the sky. The ISS fell apart. Hubble is half dead and expected to lose orbit in the next decade. The rest of our gateways to space is covered in hundreds of thousands of pieces of satellites and debris. 300 years of littering in orbit, of not caring about it. Sighing, Izuku looked back and his eyes were sharp as broken glass. I am sick and tired of keeping my feet on the ground. Of being reasonable about my goals. Of letting a scared and hurt society pull me down with them. Bite looked away, realizing how his outburst had hit deeper than he had considered. Bite, I wanna fly. Izuku, Bite stammered, trying to find a way to explain, to convince this kid not to kill himself for a dream. Stop talking and do it, kid. The voice made Izuku and Bite jump in surprise, the worn face of Tetsu stepping from around the corner of the workshop, hands hidden in the sleeves of his kimono, as his eyes focused on Izuku. The air felt electric. You want to reach the sky, to stand on the moon, to walk the stars, then you need to do it. Build the board. Hit the ground running and take off with everything you can use. Just don't be suicidal when you do it. A gesture of his hand and the glowing capacitor floated and darted to his grasp, where he held it up with a considering look. Your father was a genius who was held back by the greed of the corporate and government masses, and even now is locked away by contracts. Support courses would lock you tighter than he ever was. For all the legend that was Midoriya Hisashi, the man of power, was among the scientific community, I feel confident that his son, that you, the Star Seeker, the Horizon Breaker, that you will surpass your father in every way that matters. For a moment, Tetsu looked old and worn. I knew your father, kid. He would be proud of you so far, and he would back you every step of the way. Izuku was stunned, his heart in his throat as he stared at the old swordsman, even as a gentle toss sent the power cell floating to rest on the table. As Tetsu turned to walk away, Izuku found his voice. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet, kid," the old man chuckled. "You'll need to explain to Epsilon about your plans so she can check you over and do her magic." Izuku paled, and then set his jaw and nodded. "Got it." Bite groaned, glasses pulled off as he rubbed at his eyes. I thought you were both crazy, and now this proves it." Izuku and Tetsu glanced at each other with raised eyebrows, before Bite sighed, and looked up. "I'm with you, kid, but expect that I'm going to make you explain every FING thing you plan to do. 'Cause I need to make sure you think things through. Case in point, where do you plan to test this?" Izuku paused and looked out at the sun glinting off the edge of the sea down below, and of the long thin line of rusty metal where a beach was. "I think I have an idea for that." Izuku held up a trigger and pulled it, listening as the synchronized whine of 5 thrusters began to ignite. With a pulsating whir, all 5 ion engines began to pull up, the chain holding the prototype framework to the counter-straining before the initial surge of energy bled off, balancing out as it floated only inches above the counter. To the side, Izuku glanced up, eyes taking in the level and motion of the thrusters even as his fingers danced across the keys, a low stream of commentary following as he typed out code and adjusted systems. "Hold steady, keep the move constant." He glanced up, hearing the chain shift as the slightest change of move sent it straining against the chains. "I need stabilizers." "Fun." Bakugo stomped into class, bag over his shoulder and his eyes focused. He passed the threshold with a sneer on his lips, and then almost staggered as he focused on the dork sitting down, his desk covered with a patchwork laptop whirring away even as his fingers stormed across the keys in a quiet but rapid flurry. He waited just a second, waiting for the teen to glance at him. To cower. To jump. Earbuds in, eyes looking forward, Izuku didn't even look his way. Not when he thumped down in his chair loudly, not when the students spoke up and acted loud, not even when Bakugo very casually lit off a small explosion in the cage of his fingers. Izuku kept typing, staring ahead at something only he could understand. When the teacher walked in, Izuku glanced up, pulled out his earbuds, and folded up his laptop, sliding it in his bag and rummaging for a binder filled with homework. Bakugo did much the same, but through class, whenever the teacher let them have free time to do whatever, the click-clack of the keyboard resumed. "Why are we here? It's the middle of September. The beach is cold and no one wants to be out here." Bite asked, loose hoodie tightened up and zipped closed, as he glanced around the cleared section of Dagoba Beach. "It's literally a freezing cold dump. But the waves are coming in. And if I'm gonna fly, I need to learn how to manipulate my weight." Izuku called back, wearing a skin-tight top and leggings, a large green surfboard standing at his side. "Fine. I'll be over here next to my comfy beach oil barrel fire and watch you start freezing to death." Bite called, moving to sit on the large couch he had dragged out of the pile and covered with a thick blanket to make comfortable. "Thanks, Bite. Love the support." Izuku said over his shoulder, "Marching into the waves." For the next few hours, Bite watched and snacked on a bag of marshmallows, which became s'mores thanks to the beach fire, watching his young companion paddle out, prepare for a wave, and then get wrecked by the sea currents. And then, almost an hour and a half in, Bite blinked as, for several seconds, Izuku rode the wave, screaming in excitement and adrenaline as he surfed into the bay once more. Sir Night-Eye stood and watched his young intern push himself for another day. The gym was his constant domain, and he had watched the young man's smile become more and more strained as he focused, losing free time to his duty as All Might's successor. With a flicker of insight, he remembered Toshinori after the fight. The weeks of recovery, of treatment, of healing and hacking and surgery. The smile he had now was far too close to the smile of young Mirio. Making a decision, he pushed through the door into the gym. "Take the day off, Mirio. Go see your friends and hang out. See a movie. I hear that the new Critical Hero movie's out. Have fun. Take a cheat day." Mirio was confused and barely was able to avoid Night-Eye's pushes and shoves as he was led to the changing room for the gym. "But sir, my ski-doo dash." is not going to suffer from a day of rest. Go. Blinking, Mirio was shoved towards the showers and slowly turned around. Night Eye grinned at the vision he had of the next hour, of Mirio's reunion with his friends, and then frowned at the spoilers of the first few minutes of the movie. Drats. Now I want to see it. Izuku glanced up, pulling off a thin pair of glasses designed to reduce screen headaches, and sighed. He began rubbing his eyes, looking up at the all-might alarm clock across the room and the 3:11 a.m. that gleamed in the midnight air. Tomorrow was another weekend with no school, and he had taken advantage of that to get deep into coding and protocol setup. Sitting next to his computer was a printed joystick and grip designed for his left hand, plugged in as he set up the internal control chip correctly for a 9-engine board design. To the side of it, also plugged in, was his helmet, the lights slowly flashing in sequence as he upgraded the software in the 6 system to work with a new, thin lens that would show digital data. It was monochrome, only showing a deep gold color on the screen, but Izuku was determined to finish programming it to sync with the digital mapping of the Navi 6. Which was important, cause Izuku really didn't want to smash into a building. My eyes are killing me. He pushed away from the desk and stretched, glancing out the window at the faint glow of the night sky. 150 years ago, the sky was gray. Global warming, climate change, pollution, it got bad before it got better. Now, the sky was dark, but he could see the brightest of the stars. The faint gleam of the North Star just visible over the light pollution of Tokyo. For a moment he stared at it. The sun's closest neighbor. Light years away. Even if he never gave the world enough speed to reach it, it was still so close. If he paved the path, would others follow? Even as he stretched, he stood up, thumbing the sleep button on the computer before collapsing onto his bed. In seconds, he was dreaming of the stars. Package 3442, to Midoriya, Izuku, has been shipped on January the 22nd. Thank you for your patience, Professor Midoriya. The email made Hisashi blink. It shipped. He sat back, staring at the message, before a grin stretched across his face. It shipped. Izuku stood on a cleared section of Dagoba Beach, hidden from the street and city by meter-tall walls of stacked trash and junk. Before him, the first prototype to leave the shop rested on a cleared section of sand, wrapped gently in a cloth. Heavy boots strapped up to his knees, a jacket with a layer of impact padding, his helmet and a neck brace that would keep him from snapping his neck. All across an outfit of gold-accented cloth and black synthetic leathers. He was about to say something poignant, to make some absurd prayer or speech. A sigh, and he turned to look at his observers. Bite sat lounging in a scavenged lawn chair with a big bucket of popcorn and sunglasses, his bright silver-gray hair and tan skin contrasting with a garish red and blue Hawaiian shirt, a makeshift space heater set next to him to stave off the icy chill of the January air. Next to him, sitting on a washing machine next to the heater and looking somewhat nervous, the teal-haired Epsilon was anxiously glancing around, holding a first-aid kit. And, from a distance, Izuku had no doubt that Tetsu-sensei was watching. So, are you gonna do it or sit there and think? Bite called out, immediately trying to choke down a massive handful of popcorn as Epsilon got even more tense and nervous. I swear to God, Bite. Izuku's profanities and threats upon Bite's person and heritage cut off as the helmet was pulled on, sealing tight to his neck. The moment was ruined. The HUD on the helmet visor began to wake up, lines of code and status updates chiming as it checked the board's computer and response system. Now for the test itself. The sheet was pulled off, resting flat to reveal the gleaming black and gold of the board. From a distance, it looked almost like a surfboard, but with strange modifications. Instead of coming to a single point, each side of the front flared out to 2 long armatures with thrusters and sensors built into it, and an air intake for cooling was nestled between them. Beyond that, the board thickened considerably from a few inches to almost half a foot thick. Most of that space was empty, or filled with support and power regulation systems. At the back third, it flared out even wider, 2 side wings to act as stabilizers, including 2 flaps to help generate atmospheric lift and turning. Aiming back and down from each was another thruster. Adding that to the 3 that lined the bottom of the board, and the two mounted dead center in the back of the board, and he should have plenty of lift to get up and go. Breathing deep, he placed one foot, and then another, on the board. With a whir and a solid clank from each, the soles of his boots were magnetized, sticking to the board's riding surface. A second of testing showed he could slide them, but a small ridge along the edge of the board would keep his shoes tight to the surface. He exhaled, and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling the controller out and strapping it to his hand. Alright, test 1. He held up the controller, breathed deep, and held it as he pulled the ignition. And with a roar, the 9 engines burst to life, a field of blue gleaming against black as his helmet lit up with status reports and confirmations. All 9 thrusters initialized and warmed up, supercapacitor at 92.5% charge. That's good now, let's just slowly. With his thumb, he began to slowly press the controls to rise, and while the board took a second, the blanket beneath shifting and billowing under the move, he began to hover. Oh sheet. It works. Izuku couldn't help but shout in joy, even as Bite lowered his sunglasses and blinked. Hotten, I was expecting you to wipe out by now. And you dash, a shift of his weight, his thumb tensing just a tad too much, and Izuku lurched forwards, but overhead, and into the ocean, his board sending him into a pair of front flips before he was dunked beneath the icy waves. 5 minutes later, still waterlogged, freezing cold, and with Epsilon trying to help him set his dislocated left arm, Izuku threw a deflated basketball and knocked Bite off his chair. Fucker. You had to say it. All Might stood, eyes closed as he breathed deep and slow. He glanced down at the sink before him, grimacing at the blood and bile that had surfaced from his latest coughing fit. Breathing slow and deep, he listens to the rattle of breath through old wounds, before he released it. Behind him the door slid open, a familiar voice calling for him. Toshi, are you okay? Night Eye was silhouetted in the hall light, and All Might gave a shaky grin, running the sink to wash away the blood. Mirio is ready. I'll be passing my mantle on to him soon. And then perhaps I can rest. Night Eye hesitated before nodding. I hope so. Stretching and turning, Toshinori walked past his old sidekick, hand resting on the younger man's shoulder. Relax, my boy, I'll be fine for now. Mirio goes on break in just a few days. Yes. Indeed. I hear you have a plan for his training to get acclimated with your quirk. The green-haired man adjusted his glasses, falling into step with his mentor. Do you remember Dagoba Beach? Boots thudded across the floor, a black and gold jacket glinting light off its accents as the lean and slender form of its wearer skidded around the corner, bagel half smeared with cream cheese in his hand as the other hooked the axle of his skateboard around his fingers. And a boot caught the edge of the door. Heading out. A shift in green hair and bright eyes glanced from down the hall, smiling at his eagerness. Be safe. Home by midnight, you have class tomorrow. Got it? Love you, Mom. Izuku darted out the door, bagel in his mouth as he rushed for the lab. As he skated along the concrete veranda towards the stairs down, he had to duck, the elderly mailman for the building chuckling at the familiar sight. Sorry, Hiruzen, he called back, kicking the board up as he neared the stairwell. Pace yourself, young man, the wizened man called back as he shifted his bag once more, grinning past the pipe in his mouth. No time. And with that, Izuku leapt the railing, clearing each flight of stairs with sure and practiced motions. Sartobi Hiruzen had to chuckle, breathing a small cloud of scented pipe smoke as he sorted through the mail once more. What a vibrant young man. Mirio breathed deeply as the elevator pinged, its doors sliding open to the top floor of Sir's office. His hands were clammy, and once again he ran through the conversation with his friends, and the comment that Tamaki had given him. The elven-like brunette had been resting, head across his lap as Nijire was sleeping at Mirio's side after a late movie night, her shoulders under his arm. What does it matter, if it wasn't your power? Don't you want to save people, Mirio? Take the power. Save more people, save them faster, be better. That's what matters, right? He grinned at that, his normally large smile softening to something gentle, and his cheeks blushing as he thought of how that meeting had gone with Tamaki and Nijire. He shook his head to clear his thoughts and clenched his fist. I'll save everyone I can, and this will make me save more, faster. His smile grew back to bursting as he finally reached the door to the office he was directed to. He opened the door and saw All Might standing at the window, form collapsed to his weaker self, and greeted him with a deep smile. "Morning, young Mirio. Are you ready?" Bite leaned out of his office, the wheels of his desk chair clacking as he tilted from 5 wheels to 2, hand holding the door frame as he glanced at the freshly changed form of his young comrade. "Yo, Star Child, you heading to the beach?" -12 Malawian kwaches is finished and the checks are all green. Good luck. Remember to sync your helmet to EP system or she'll hang you upside down off the flagpole again. Bite chuckled at the memory even as Izuku sighed in defeat. Fine, I'll turn the kitty logs on. Now, can I go or do you have anything else to say? Nah, I'm finished. Good luck. Bite watched the teen hook the board over his shoulder and jog for the stairwell. Sighing, he glanced back at the desk and groaned. FING college courses. Mirio grimaced slightly as he rode the elevator down. He swore he could still taste the acrid bite of the hare's taste on his tongue, and despite All Might's warnings that it would take a while to kick in, he felt let down by the lack of power surging through him. He had focused and steeled himself to be ready, and now he had to wait. Fret not, Mirio. We'll be heading somewhere you can let loose when the power finally kicks in. All Might seemed to pick up on Mirio's nerves, and glanced over as they left the building, turning to walk towards a battered blue pickup truck. Sir, if I may, where are we going? We're going to go back to the basics of what makes a hero. Community service. To do good for the sake of doing good. A cough, and All Might spat out some blood into a napkin he pulled from a baggy pocket, before tossing it into a trash can next to the car. Mirio climbed into the passenger seat and All Might took the wheel. They buckled up before he continued his explanation. You need something to focus on, a target to use the power that you now possess against. As such, we shall head to a beach in need of cleaning. It's near my old neighborhood. Used to be a fairly popular date location before the currents started washing old junk up on the shore. Soon enough, it was a popular place to dump trash for those with less moral views. All Might began to pull out of the parking, and Mirio glanced up to see the sun slowly rising over the horizon. He knew that the sea was at least half an hour away and breathed slowly, to relax, even as the truck moved through the streets towards Mizudafu Ward. Izuku checked his gear once more. His new helmet had a far more versatile screen, and the sleek shape was layered with carbon fiber lattices, with the same gold-colored accents as the rest of his gear. His leather jacket was still at the lab, so instead, he was wearing a new pitch-black bodysuit prototype, the tight cloth fitting snugly around his slender form, which was also accented by golden padding around his joints and ribs. The latches of his large, mechanical-looking boots were also accented with the same shade of brassy gold, giving him a very steampunk solar vibe, according to Bite. Finishing up his mental checklist, he breathed deep and looked out at the endless blue expanse of the sea, at the pale white line of sky and ocean that rested before him, the sun still slowly rising above the water and the pastel clouds. When he leaped onto the board that rested on a plank of wood to keep it above the sand of the beach, Izuku felt the whir of his magnetic boots as they adhered to his newest creation. The Mark 12, while sharing the general shape of a surfboard, had been modified quite a bit. The stabilizing wings had been pulled further back and shortened, forming an almost cross-guard shape to the spear point design of the board. The tip had also been flattened from a single point to a long, flat edge that acted almost like a scoop, lifting the front of the board to catch the air in the intake below it. But the most interesting addition would have to be the tall, black and gold accented handle that rose to meet his left hand on the boat. Along with providing him a place to grab and steady himself against the wind of travel, it held a series of keys along its molded grip and a twisting throttle that would let him manually control the speed and general direction of his board, a design added after a humiliating and painful day where his helmet's batteries ran out mid-flight, and he crashed into the shallow beach at over 40 kilometers per hour. Navi ignition. There was a gleam of blue as the energy surged, 12 ion engines igniting as the power cell, as Bite now called it, pulsed outwards. The surge of energy fired through thick wiring and conductive circuits. With a smooth and often practiced motion, the board lifted off the ground and hovered. Izuku shifted a bit, the board drifting around under his feet, as he quickly familiarized himself with the weight and balance of the new model. Grinning as he got accustomed to it, he leaned forward, hand tightening on the control handle as he flicked the safety off. Navi, light up the testing route for me. Variant 3, please. Oh, and get the music ready. Horizon, playlist, please. The screen built into his visor lit up, gleaming blue rings and checkpoints appearing in augmented reality around him. All right, kick it. As the synthetic beat began, adrenaline and excitement filled his veins. He pulled the throttle, a spray of sand and water flying up in his wake. All Might grew somber as he stared at the wall of trash that was once a beautiful beach. It's taller than last time, you can't even see the ocean past this wall of refuse. Filled with a quiet regret at the actions of the common people, he turned back and grinned at Mirio. It seems our work is cut out for us. Come, let us start near the stairs. As the two blondes moved down the street to the stairs, they completely missed a twisting path that led deeper into the mass of junk. If they had seen it, perhaps they would have heard the rush of air as well. Regardless, they quickly got to work. Mirio used his newfound musculature and strength to drag large pieces of trash from the heap, shifting and piling them in an orderly stack on the curb. Soon, the upper parts of the stairs were clean, and with a bright grin, Mirio kept working as Yagi drove first one, then two, loads of junk to a recycling plant several kilometers away. When the taller blonde came back yet again, it was to Mirio considering a precariously stacked wall of junk. He turned back to Yagi as he approached and spoke. I could permeate through it, but it might be easier to just collapse it. Nodding in agreement, Yagi grinned in excitement. Allow me. Mirio nodded and backed away while Yagi grinned and glanced around. The tall concrete walls surrounding the beach and the added coverage of the piles of junk around them were more than suitable cover, so All Might bulked up and threw a quick punch, knocking the wall of junk over, only to blink in surprise as it revealed a wide open view of the ocean and over 30 meters of beach leading up to the water. What in? Mirio was just as surprised, and the two blondes looked around as they stepped out onto the beach. There were still scattered piles of junk and loose ends here and there, a half-buried truck, a bunch of sofas and blankets and turned-over metal frames surrounding a bonfire pit made out of a washing machine, and a few dozen piles of rusted and destroyed crates stacked to block the wind nearby. Where trash had once been scattered densely across the expanse of the beach, there was now organized, castle-like walls piled high around the sidewalk. As a result, the beach had become a cove hidden by junk. Who would do such a strange thing? Mirio spoke up, eyebrows raised in incredulity as the two of them stared, before the glint and gleam of something moving over the water drew their attention. All Might blinked and focused. Eyes accustomed to sharp speeds and intense fights narrowed as he took in the figure of black and gold, his feet held tight as he seemed to surf above the waves. Now that he listened, the whir of air rushing past, of engines straining under stress, was present, if faint and strange. Mirio and All Might could do nothing but simply stare, however, as they saw what could only be described as a dance maneuver. Izuku was in the zone. The revision to the controls since his last attempt were nearly perfect, and Navi was handling the gap with very little lag, even if he occasionally needed to give her verbal commands to bridge actions. He pulled through another blue AR ring, near the cresting waves, and kicked the engines on high even as he shifted and leaned back, board pulling a high-speed drift in a skidding arc above the water to the next ring. His free hand hung low and caught the edge of a wave as he shot past, the board leaving a wave in his wake as he came out of the low curve. He crouched low to build up speed as he flew at the next one across the beach. This was one of the last maneuvers for this test, the straight full beach speed test, and then the last two major tests were the vertical climb and free fall tests. He leaned forward, vision narrowed and focus honed as he gave the throttle a full twist, the engines around him changing from the content purring sound of a large cat to the scream of a fighter jet's engine. The sound was echoed only by his muffled shout of excitement, the world around him vanishing into a blur as the speedometer in his helmet shot up. 50 km, 70 kilometers per hour, 100, 140, 18, no, 200. And there's 250. 270. As the beach came to an end, he cursed and let up on the throttle, pulling into a wide arc back out to sea and breathing deep. 281. That the fastest I can get here on the beach, but I can feel it. I have more, can go faster. He sighed as he gave the board a slow sway back and forth, rocking and drifting as he lined up and then sped towards the digital rings that marked his upward turn. Grinning at what would come next, he tapped a button to tighten the grip of his boots to the surface of the board, leaning till he was almost flat to the surface, one boot sliding back to rest against the hood of the rear thruster array and locking tight. His free hand reached down and grasped a grip hidden under the floor guard, and he hit the throttle once more. The skyline around him, the view of the ocean and the beach and the horizon, faded away as he went vertical. He could see it, could feel it, the world quickly growing colder, only the thick insulation of his suit keeping him from chilling from the speed and altitude as his height counter, a small number near his speed on the HUD, began to spike. 50 meters. The beach vanished from sight, his eyes focused only on the number and the sky. 100 meters. His heart began to flutter, his system slowly flooding with more adrenaline. 200. His pulse jumped. His hand gripped tighter. 300. Almost to the max height he was allowed. 340. Ah, damn it. Izuku reached the peak of his allowed height and slowed, drifting to a stop. For a moment, the world was still. Only him and the vast sky, and the tracker, barely, clicked over to 350 meters. Navi, count from 5. And then, breathing deep, he turned the engines off, held his arms wide, and began to fall back to earth. What? Mirio shouted, eyes blowing wide as he looked up, seeing the blue streak of power that had trailed after the young man's board slowly flicker and die, before he began to fall to the ground. Panic beat in his chest as he glanced around frantically, trying and failing to find a way to catch or stop the falling teen. Already the teen was halfway back to the ground, spinning and tumbling as he and the board fell to the sea below. Besides Mirio, All Might tensed and dug his feet into the sand, readying to leap, to save this foolish citizen. Izuku's grin was so wide, he doubted All Mights could compare. The timer in his vision hit 0, and with a blooming wave of energy, the board slowed. His handle and braced form against the board was all that kept him from slipping off into the sea below as the air seemed to sparkle and flow with the electromagnetic aura from the engines, a micro-sized aurora borealis wreathing his form. He laughed, high and joyous as he twisted, pulling out of his fall and blasting just centimeters away and across the surface of the waves. In fact, he was so distracted by his laughter, he never noticed the large, stern-looking blonde reaching out to snag his board's side as he slowed. He only noticed when he was already twisting and rolling to his feet, months of training drilled into him by Tetsu coming into play as he turned back, eyes locking onto the intimidating form of All Might. The hero was holding his board in his grasp, even as the engines shifted to hover mode when he left its surface and the safety kicked in. Izuku saw red. All Might's stare focused from the hunk of technology in his hand, the jets flickering from full to an idle state, to the blackened gold figure across from him rolling onto its feet. His voice, one that had long since been perfected to strike fear into the hearts of the guilty, rang out. Public disturbance, illegal technology, unregistered support gear, and public power use? I should take you up to the police station now, but I'm curious. Did you clear the beach? Keep it for yourself. The black visor was emotionless, but as he talked, All Might could see lines of tension across the body under the suit. Hands came up to the helmet and All Might tensed for a fight, or some sort of surprise, but was caught off guard by the sight the helmet coming off to reveal piercing green eyes. The sides of his skull were buzz-cut short, only a thin layer of vibrant green fuzz leading up to the long messy locks of dark green and black that hung loose from the top of his head. Green freckles and the shape of baby fat across his cheeks was more than enough, when combined with his short and slender stature, to make only one word came to mind for the hero. Young. Before All Might could fully process the sudden change in how he viewed this as the act of a young man, the teen's voice rang out, with a venom in his voice so potent, it almost took All Might aback. Excuse me? That's not support gear. I made it. All Might shifted his gaze back to the board held in his hand, years of practice and understanding bringing his mind along the design and picking at the sheer level of development. This is highly developed work, young man. I would appreciate it if you didn't lie. Did you steal it? Or perhaps you were sold it? This isn't something that just any dash. Wow. You are even more of a self-absorbed but than I remember. The phrase cut All Might's lecture off and left the hero blinking, dumbfounded. And that was all the teen needed. With a flare of energy and shocking current, All Might flinched back from the board as it shot forwards, spinning to rest behind the teen. The sand around him shifted. You told me that I can't be a hero. Fine. Whatever. But then you come to me like this? Come to finish the job of making me suicidal? It's taken almost a year to get over you and your bullshit, All Might. The teen was tense, tears slowly dripping from angry eyes as he stared at the hero. Young man, what you are doing is breaking the law dash. The law. You and the heroes. The regulations and the goddamn support companies. I built my way out of hell after you told me to give up. I refuse to give this dream up. Go if yourself. The teen stepped back, foot clanging to the board, and All Might lunged to catch him. A deep guilt welled up in his heart at the words, at the poison of this teen. The board, idling for oh so long, surged with blue light once more, the figure of the teen shooting up and back and away from All Might's grasp. The helmet was pulled back on and from behind it, one last statement, metallic and artificial and cold, rang out. Stand in awe as I leave you behind. With a blur of energy, the board was accelerating away. Shifting, All Might prepared to leap, to catch the teen. A cough, red blood splattering on oil-stained sand. Yagi Tashinori staggered, the sudden pain causing All Might's form to flicker away. I got distracted. Didn't think of the stress I was under. Mirio finally made his way to All Might's side, having had to jog most of the beach to reach the older hero. Are you all right, Mr. Might, sir? Another cough and more blood splattered the sand. No. I feel as if I've made a grave mistake. Izuku landed his board, storming off and across the rooftop of the lab to the stairwell, pulling his helmet off and tensing, wanting to throw it aside, to break something. He froze, muscles trembling with stress. With a slow unclenching of his fist, he let the helmet drop onto the rooftop, and he looked out. Not at the beach, where his once hero likely still stood, but away from them, away from the rising sun behind him. He looked out at the city. I'll show him exactly what I can do. Bakugo glanced around the entry of UA, eyes skimming past the various teens and applicants as he focused on the building and its grounds. Extras, all of them. Only the best of us are gonna pass, and I'm gonna lead the pack. My road to number 1 starts right here. He focused, calming himself even as the instinct to flare and declare himself rose. He could wait, keep the power and emotion stocked until necessary. A smirk crossed his face as one last glance confirmed it. The nerd truly didn't show up. Good FNG riddance. He ignored the tinge of guilt that welled up at the thought. He ignored the faint whisper in his ears that told him he had messed up and didn't deserve to be there. He was only focused ahead of him. And so he headed in, prepared to take the UA entrance exam. All Might glanced around the beach, proud of Mirio's progress. Even now, the beach from the pier almost down towards the far end was all but cleared, and several large craters and trenches showed clearly where Mirio and Yagi had trained the younger teen in the use of One for All. The teen was still learning, but the natural strength and power of his training had more than been enough to mitigate the backlash from the first use of One for All. Practice had only refined his control, and while using more than a quarter of it would still damage the teen, it had already shown in his own quirk. Permeability had begun to evolve and change, adapting to the new strength of its wielder. The teen could now flicker between solid and permeable at will, and the intangible state had been strengthened until he became nearly translucent when using it. He glanced at the muscled teen as he lifted and compressed another stack of junk, pride in his heart. His old sidekick had been more than right about Mirio's heart and drive, and the teen would likely be done with his task before the week was out. He smiled at him and glanced down at the clear white sand of the beach before looking out at the sea. The rising sun almost made him think, for a moment, of the teen with a hoverboard. He hasn't returned, though all the couches and seating disappeared that first night. I hope he decided that reckless behavior was unheroic and has stopped. Sadly, I doubt it. He glanced up at the sunrise far ahead, the gleaming of sun off the waves stretching out to the horizon. Inko sighed and glanced at the paperwork on her desk. She was at work, manning one of the help desks for the children's ward and thumbing through files and medical histories for the other nurses who were doing checkups. She enjoyed her job, enjoyed helping and teaching and seeing young children recover and grow stronger, but she still thought of her son every time another child was told about a new, exciting quirk. She wondered, some days, if it was her or Hisashi who did this to him. If they were just that unlucky, if their marriage was cursed to always push them apart, to make it seem like less. She didn't always want to admit it, but nothing really changed in her life when he had been hired by the Island Project. No, it changed years before that. It changed when he started his own research company, less than a decade out of university. It changed when he came home less and less. Oh, he was passionate. He was loving and caring and focused. But she had been completing pre-med with hopes to go to medical school, and he was pushing the boundaries of science and quirks and technology. And then she had Izuku, her ball of wonderful sunshine and joy. Hisashi and her had both loved him, but Inko was the one whose dreams had to be shoved aside. She took a part-time nursing position, paying off her debt and loans with Hisashi and her family's help, as Hisashi bought them a new, larger apartment. He even tried to tone back the late nights. For the first year, it was wonderful if stressful in the Midoriya household. And then rumors about the SRA being written up got around. Suddenly Hisashi was skipping nights at home, constantly going to meetings or dealing with politics, and try so hard. His dreams were burning around him, and she could barely help, still so focused on trying to raise their son. Money got tighter. When he announced the offer from Island, she was worried, but also relieved. Steady income would help them, would keep Izuku safe and happy. Even now, a decade and change later, she still was unsure if she would have preferred Hisashi stay here with her, or if him taking the Island job was the smarter choice. And now, she had another choice, one her son had asked for. One she wasn't sure about, one that she wished Hisashi could talk to her about. That she still hadn't been convinced about. I want to take online classes. I think they'll be better for me. I don't want to waste any more time, and I'm already taking some online college courses. Inko sighed, and handed out another folder to a nurse with it. Smile. Her son had for years dreamed of Yue, but in the last year that had changed. Her brilliant baby boy, the joyous and always cheerful kid she loved, had grown up. He was almost taller than her now, his smiles were more genuine, but also rarer. More focused and reserved. He told her about his inventions and his dreams, and the amazing discoveries and changes. He was fit and confident in his own skin now. She was worried, though, that letting him do schooling online was a mistake, that he would grow stunted and lonely. She paused and looked down at the small photo on her desk of her son smiling up at her. Breathing slowly, she decided. She would support this change, would sign his papers and let him make this choice himself. Bite glanced up from his drawing desk, eyes focusing past them as he took in the familiar form of Marioka Epson Natsuko. She was leaning against the doorway into his studio, one arm held across her stomach as the other held a six-pack of beer. Can I chill here for a bit? I need to take my mind off things. Bite nodded and waved at the paint-splat couch that rested below the windows behind him. By all means, Nat, he made sure to save the project he was working on, a simple commission design for a band he knew, before turning to take in the teal-haired girl who rested on the couch, an opened beer in her hand as she stared out at the early morning sky. He stretched and stood from the chair, wandering his way to the couch. His hands darted out to snag a beer, before he stretched out next to her, his head in her lap as he stared up at her, a soft smile on his face. What's on your mind? She glanced down and sighed, shifting sideways so his head rested in her lap while her back rested on the couch arm, her legs folding under his head as her hands began to card through loose silver hair. It's the kid again. Epsilon chuckled, low and annoyed. walked into him sleeping next to the printer earlier, laptop on his lap as he worked on coding for one project or another. Yeah, I don't know the details, but something's lit a fire under him, and considering how crazy focused he normally is, it's sorta scary seeing how much he's thrown into his projects. I know he's been asking everyone for bits and pieces of tech and advice. Hell, he even got Solo to give him some of those tracker camera drones, the ones with the follow protocol he uses to film his races. Epsilon smirked and chuckled. And Solo actually handed them over? I'm shocked. The two fell into a soft sort of silence, comfortable for a few minutes just staring out the window and sipping beer. Hey! Bite. Yeah, Eps. Did you ever have a dream like Izuku's? His whole space thing. The silver-haired teen glanced at Epsilon's face, noting the faint blush as she pointedly stared out the window. Maybe not the same, but when I was just a kid, I wanted to be a spy. You know, slick suits, expensive gadgets, the works. The dusky-skinned teen chuckled, raised his hand, and a flicker of light and color burst and flashed around his fingertips. I even had this interesting and flashy illusion quirk. I dreamed of how it would be flashbangs and disguises and distractions, and then I was in middle school and my brother. The gentle carding of hair became slower and more careful. The accident. I know, you've talked about it before. Yeah, little bro was so excited about his trip, and then... Trigger. Yeah. Trigger. Bite took a long swig of beer, face tight and deadened. I love my life. I dragged myself out of depression, I found a calling I love, I'm surrounded by amazing people like Old Man and Starkid and you. Epsilon blushed, tucking a bang of teal hair behind her ear, her eyes soft as she watched Bite gesture. She glanced down, eyes tracing the dark features of her friend, and her lips quirked as an idea came to her. You know, Bite? He twisted his head and glanced up, those gray eyes shifting with his quirk's colors as she leaned close. Yeah. I think you're amazing too. Leaning down, she carefully pressed her lips to his. A moment of stunned inaction, her lips slowly parting his, and he kissed her back. A ringing strike, steel on steel, differentiated by shape and heat, the glowing yellow-red of the heated blade a sharp contrast to the dark blue of the hammer. Tetsu Jishaka focused, the metal of the hammer resonating as he drove it down, guiding it with a touch of his quirk, the steel held in the grasp of his magnetism. He hammered again and again, his quirk reading the layers of steel and the flow of heat, finding and binding loose parts of metal, twisting molecules together where they seemed weakest, loosening stress where it built unduly. Some people nowadays would disdain the art, decry the blades formed by old methods as inferior to modern blades, that the better blades were made of stronger materials, with machine-like precision. And in some ways, this was true. Some modern blades were sharper. Some were stronger, more durable. But Jishaka believed that Shinken, that true blades, were an art, not a science. His quirk, the innate ability to use and feel magnetic forces, only reaffirmed it, as well as his folly of youth. As his body and quirk fell into the familiar flow of smithing, his mind wandered to the past. He remembered glory days, where his village and town was free from the antics of villains and heroes. An age where the only true threat was the local yaks, who were more of a quiet police and security than a group of thugs. He also remembered how that had suddenly changed. The calls of the villains who had taken up residence. The news and quiet terror that had consumed his community. The same terror that had led to him gripping a bloodied sword, as he used his quirk in full for the first time. He remembered the news that he had been given an alias by his town. A name to protect him from the heroes who came after, finding only the charnel house he had. Masamune. Honestly, even now he still groaned at the sheer level of Chiyuni his alias held. He had rarely acted in the years after his first appearance, but in some parts of Japan, he knew there was still a bounty on his head for vigilantism and murder. He glanced down and lifted the blade, checking its bevels were straight and the curve he was hammering was smooth, before returning it to the heat. He glanced up and sighed, the bright air of the late morning cool and fresh even with the heat from the forge. I do wonder who will eventually have the higher bounty. Or my youngest protege? Izuku stepped up to the edge, boots crunching gravel under his steps, the sharp afternoon breeze sweeping through the valleys and corridors of the city, whipped up faster and faster by the Earth's own rotation, carrying that scent of the distant sea behind him. He stood at the edge of an old apartment building, long since abandoned. Just one more monument to the past, left to rot by owners who refused to change. Izuku stretched, eyes roaming over the city as it stretched out below him. Above him, the sun slowly rose to noon, the brightest part of the day. His undersuit was refined and finished now, cloth and padding held snugly to his form, while his heavy boots latched around his lower legs. Finishing his stretches, he reached down and pulled up the jacket he had made for this. The dark synthetic material only marked with gleaming golden accents that traced the seams, while inside the lining was printed with a hexagon pattern based off the solar paper cells that adorned his helmet. He shrugged the jacket on, its lower edge cresting high at the small of his back, before coming down in a sweeping cut to hang nearly halfway to his knees in front. Leaning down, he knelt and grabbed the helmet, thumb sweeping a small sensor to turn it on and unlock the panel that would wrap his chin. The golden visor began to gleam and glow. The black helmet had been reinforced and streamlined, sweeping lines flowing back from the visor, breaking up the solar paper that wrapped it into long strips. A shift of the helmet and he slid it on, feeling the hermetic seal link with the collar of his suit and squeezed gently around his jawline. Blinking, Izuku focused, seeing lines of code cross around the visor and waiting. A line of symbols began to appear, just at the bottom of his view. Simple check lights for his suit, his board, the helmet, and then 3 new symbols began to flicker into place. The first to start and finish was a simple V shape, flowing around a smaller diamond shape. As it flickered green, a calm and feminine voice rang out. Wayfinder online, good morning user. Morning Wayfinder. The next to flicker and turn green was a curved square shape, the interior of it broken into triangle by 3 lines that met in the center. As it stopped flickering, a cheerful young voice spoke up. Hotshot ready to rock. Good. One more and we can get going. Thus, one took the longest, nearly twice the length of Wayfinder. Its symbol was a simplified padlock design with a skull where the keyhole would normally sit. As it turned green, a low chuckle flowed out of the helmet's earpieces. Hey bossman. Izuku smiled in relief, hearing the somewhat lackadaisic tones of the Vi. Hijack, you ready? Of course, boss. Trust in me, you made me after all. I do. Izuku breathed and rolled his shoulders, setting the jacket a bit more comfortable. Are we all ready? A chorus of agreement came from the VIs, and Izuku grinned under the helmet. He had spent a lot of time on them, and hearing all 3 voices made his heart pulse with excitement and pride. Navi, his old mapping 6, had been reborn first, built and designed for a much faster and efficient system. Even now the 6 renamed Wayfinder was using an array of sensors in the helmet and the nearby hoverboard to scan and 3D map the surroundings, using the information to update and edit a 3D model of the city. Hotshot and Hijack were more complicated. Hotshot was built off of the tracking and piloting software that Solo, the drone racer of the lab, used for some of his camera drone. Of course, it had been all but rewritten to work for the hoverboard, but it should mean that if he needs to focus on something else, the board could still fly him and keep him steady. It could also fly by itself, if necessary, such as if he needed to get it away from him or have it pick him up. Hijack was the sole offensive 6 of the lot. It ran hacking protocols, picked up radio chatter, could tune and decrypt local police and hero radio frequencies, and keep track of all of it simultaneously. It took a month of long nights while he remade his board with the final edits. Hijack was primarily a passive hacker, picking up on signals and intercepting communications, instead of trying to hack into computers and past firewalls. As all 3 VIs gave final checks everything was working, Izuku turned back and eyed the tarp-covered frame on the roof behind him. Grabbing the waterproof cloth, he pulled it back to show the gleaming black and gold hoverboard. Sweeping wings off the back for the stabilizers, lined with the gleaming hexes of the solar paper. The rounded rear chassis, with the flat footrest to brace for hard acceleration. A wide square wedge for the front, keeping the center of the board straight and even, lined with gold-colored plating for the boots to stay connected to. A set of handles embedded for those more gravity and sanity-defying stunts. He knew that in there, a series of 3 homegrown supercapacitors had enough stored power from the lab's rooftop solar farm and leached off the power grid in abandoned buildings to power all the thrusters at full capacity for almost a full day. He also knew that there were far more bits of tech stored in the once empty frame. From scanning systems to GPS and gyroscopes and accelerometers, all wired into a computer that filled the entire center of the board, which was in turn connected to the 3 rebuilt computer towers that were sitting in the abandoned Morningstar labs. With it, the VIs could connect and control the board and give him immediate feedback and assistance. Flexing his gloved hands, Izuku chuckled and stepped on, turning and letting his boots connect to the board's surface with a mechanical clank sound, hand rapping on the steering staff as he got comfortable. Wayfinder, give me a path. Hotshot, warm her up. As the visor flickered to life with waypoints and distance markers, the board flickered, soft blue glow flowing from the redesigned 15 engines spread across the frame, lifting the board up and sending gravel and dust skittering across the roof. Path found. Hover, 1 fully functioning. Good. Hijack, keep an ear out. I want to know who sees this. Will do, bossman. Warming up my hacks now. Izuku took a deep breath and breathed out slow. His pulse was pounding. His hands were sweating in his gloves and his body felt warm and flushed. He tightened his grip, and he let his knees shake slightly. For a moment he heard the echo of All Might's words. Heroics is far too dangerous for a disadvantage like that. He heard Bakugo. Go take a swan dive off the roof. He closed his eyes and he could all but see it. The crowds of endless people, commenting on how sad it was that he was quirkless. How he was useless. How he was to be pitied. His hand shook even more, before it slowly steadied, tightening on the handle as his fingers lightly rested over the accelerator. For a moment, the crowd in his mind began to grow, speaking louder and more frantic, as if they knew what was going to happen. And since they were his own fears, then maybe they knew. He grinned, mouth wide under his helmet with all teeth and pride and spite. He opened his eyes, and the crowd he had imagined was gone. Instead he saw the sky above, the ground below, and the concrete and glass maze of the city between the two. A horizon, stretching out between the world of heroes and the distant sky filled with stars. He crouched, adrenaline spiking. Tensing, he jumped and drew himself up, body tensing and shifting, boots dragging the front of the board up and aiming at the sky, over the edge into the abyss of the unknown. A practiced movement had his body lowering to the board, free hand hooking on a handle near the front, as one of his feet slipped back and locked on the rear step over the engines. It was almost like he was doing an ollie, coming in line with the entire board, lowering his center of gravity to stabilize and support himself. After all, the unknown had never truly scared him. He pulled the trigger flush, the quiet hum of the engines changed, and instead of a hum, it was the roar of dragons. The sound of stars falling, of rockets and beasts, and as if every bell in the world was rang in sequence, the sound so loud it rattled your bones. Izuku could feel it in his chest, in his bones, in his blood. The roar of his dream, of his work and sweat and tears. Gleaming blue auroras flared to life, bathing him in the colors like he stood in a comet's trail, the gravel blasting up in the wake of the ionized field. And then the board moved. He shot off into the space of the city, board tipping down as it moved past the leg, angling into the concrete jungle, even as the combination of gravity and move sent him hurling forwards like an arrow from a bow. He held tight, twisted the grip and screamed his passion to the world. Yeehaw! The unknown should be scared of him. But he's sick and tired of waiting around. Like a comet, the world seemed to blur around him, and he shifted, rising to feel the drag of the wind, his jacket's long edges stretched behind him as the wind ripped and tore at him, gleaming gold and black shining in the midday sun. Doubts that once held him, ripped away with the rush of his blood in his veins. His hesitation shattered like glass, his fears burned away in the wake. Subtly. Waiting. Taking insults and staying quiet out of fear. He was going to be loud. and he was gonna make the world watch. The roar of the thrusters in his ears, the whine of power through the conduits and the scream of wind as it ripped and tore at him, making every shift and movement all the more risky and visceral. He couldn't stop the tears of joy. He couldn't stop the deep, bone-shaking laugh. He leaned into a wide drifting turn, slowing to let his momentum carry him through the air. The wake of his passing tore papers from the gutters, leaves from the trees, and dust from the street, before he shifted and fired the thrusters once more. People below him shouted and screamed in confusion, or pointed their cameras up at the sky for better pictures, or ducked out of the way. Izuku twisted and shifted, the board snapping to climb higher as he passed by the windows of another building, slowly swaying and shifting to get used to the pressure the city built from the updrafts and crosswinds. Bossman, you just hit social media. The first videos are already getting uploaded, and a few dozen posts of you are going live now. A few #villain and a single #vigilante, the synthetic drawl rang out, even as Izuku began to sober up and did a spiraling twist through a side alley and out onto another major street. Good job, Hijack. Keep an eye on the comm for the hero deployment. I want to know who I gotta outrun. The teen rolled his shoulders and swerved between two billboards, cutting up and over roofs as he darted through the neighborhoods. Got the deployment, and this is great. Seems like you get to meet some old idols of yours. Really, who? Several blocks away, a blonde looked down at her communicator, eyebrow quirked as she read a new message. Next to her, her on-again, off-again partner and occasional fling was reading his own phone's message, his device encased in a lacquered wooden case to match his theme. The two glanced up and slid their phones away, even as they started running, hands tapping their earpieces to connect to their respective hero agencies. This is MT Lady on the way. Kamui Woods reporting for action. The two heroes raced through the city, vines and wooden pole launching Kamui up and across streets and around corners while MT Lady carefully abused her power to grow and shrink in rapid cycles, using the height and perspective to grow and dance through traffic, following behind her partner as they closed in. Through their respective earpieces, they were quickly given directions, support staff trying to keep track of the suspected villain activity. Kamui Woods was the first to see it, if you want to call what he did, seeing it. A roar of wind and sound screaming past him. A jet stream of pressure which threw him off balance, making him twist and glance to see only the colors gold and black before the target vanished around another building's edge. Found the target. On it. I'll block you, grab. Kamui lunged forwards, plants growing and forming a secure ledge for him to see the target, eyes darting around the streets around and below him. And then he froze, a wave of pressure washing over him. A quirk. Hey, whatcha looking for? The sound was deep and digitally distorted, and Kamui darted and spun, arms ped back to attack even as his eyes took in the target. Black and gold armored bodysuit and jacket. A full-face helmet. And a board, blue jets flickering and firing as it floated upside down, the target's head just above Kamui's height. Attention, you are under arrest. The target crossed his arms, his jacket seeming to ignore local gravity as the helmeted head tilted in a questioning manner. Under arrest? Why, under what justification and law? Kamui paused before rallying, hearing the sounds of his support crew rattling off the right answer. Public quirk use, disrupting the peace, and illegal technology. The figure straightened up, or down. Kamui wasn't sure about the phrasing when someone was upside down, the visor meeting Kamui's gaze evenly. Really? Those are the char dash. The figure glanced to the side and the rest of the words were cut off as the engines holding the target afloat suddenly died, and board's bottom thrusters, currently pointed up, flared with a flash of blue energy before shooting down and below the ridge of the rooftops. Mount Lady's leg passed through that same space, a straight push kick passing the roof. Kamui Woods was running forwards already, ignoring the shout of, "Take this," from Mount Lady as he rushed to keep track of the target. A flare of blue, a shifting black and gold shape, the suddenly aggravated and far more demonic-sounding distortion. Oh, so we're doing it the fun way. Kamui Woods leapt after the figure, stretching out with his vines to grab a hold, even as the blue streams of energy surged. As if on instinct, The board seemed to dance and twist back and up, avoiding the lashing plants. All the while, the figure shifting and swerving, throwing their weight around to push and twist the board all the more aggressively. The lady attacked again, arms sweeping down and through the air around the figure, only for the board to surge up. The he supposed villain was the term now, using her arm and the pressure of the air to push himself up and back, the faint roar of the hoverboard growing louder and more high-pitched, a surge of light following as he rose to a height far above the buildings. For a moment he seemed to drift, engines flickering off as he twisted, bringing the board and his body back in line and then flaring in that blue energy, before he blasted right at a milady. Kamui lunged, wooden pillars spiking up to prepare for his binding prison, even as MD Lady crouched and spread her stance to prepare to fight. A flare of blue, a twisting body that spun upside down, and a rush of air was all they got, as the target twisted and darted under MD Lady, passing through the gap between her thighs while she crashed into the growing wooden pillars. As the two heroes stumbled and tried to reorient to chase, the figure on the hoverboard yelled out, "Betcha you can't keep up." As the heroes began to chase, the whir and whine of the hoverboard pitched higher and higher, before, just as they closed in for another attempt at capture, the figure crouched and accelerated, pulling up and around in a rapidly quickening loop, before turning to a blur in seconds that arched up and over the city. Then, with an echoing blast of air pressure, he broke the sound barrier, turning from an identifiable figure into a streak of color against the blue sky. Bakugo grinned, smoke slowly drifting from the piles of robots and burn marks that surrounded him. He stood, the sole examinee who hadn't been chased off or distracted by the zero-pointer. Around him, metal shards littered the streets of the fake city. He glanced up as the sound of the horns went off, announcing the end of the exam. Breathing deep, he let the limb of a bot drop from his hand as he leapt down to the street from the pile he was on. He glanced around as the rest of the extras in his exam staggered and limped back towards the entrance. Bakugo held up his hand, grin fading as he noticed the blisters on his palm and the slow shaking and twitching of his hand. He snarled and clenched his fist. He needed to be better. He strode towards the entrance, hands slowly dripping red behind him as his blisters popped. Uraraka grunted in pain, feeling Recovery Girl's quirk work on her. Her legs, both of which were bruised and bloodied from when she tried to drag herself out of rubble, were healed up. As she watched skin knit back together and bruises fade, she felt a wave of exhaustion rush through her. Leaning her head back on the stretcher, she breathed out in worry. Is 34 points enough? As the fatigue of Recovery Girl's quirk set in, she closed her eyes and fell into a fitful. Nedzu was walking back towards his office, paws tapping at his custom phone as he looked over his messages. When he came across one in particular, he paused, eyebrow raised. No, what is this? He tapped the link, tilting the phone to see the video full screen. Gold and black, blue energy, complex aerial maneuvers, and an astonishing grasp of battlefield awareness. And the emotion. That wasn't a villain acting out of greed. No, he has seen that. Has seen villains and greed and vindictive glee, but this was none of those. It tickled at his thoughts, drew him to pause and think, to consider, and then it hits him. He's seen that emotion and body language before. That was a student who had reached a new plateau. A rival who triumphed with hard work. Nedzu rushed to his office, sliding into the chair and turning on his computer, a spark of curiosity leading him down the rabbit hole. So many video clips, so many timestamps to check and compare. Where did he start? Where did he end up? Nedzu was excited to find out. The board swerved and swayed as Izuku rushed out over the seas, a kilometer off the coast as he regained his breath and let the adrenaline fade, only to blink and wobble as his muscles burned with a deep ache and his knees nearly gave out. Hotshot, hold her steady. I need to sit for a minute. As the board came to a stop, Izuku turned off his boots and shifted, sitting with his knees straddling the board as his hands came up and he fumbled with clumsy fingers at his helmet latch. With a hiss, it came loose, and he breathed deeply of clean ocean breeze. The helmet in his lap, he looked up at the now setting sun, seeing the sea around him sparkle as the waves turned gold in the coming half-light. For a moment he was just there, letting the world turn, the sea waves pass below him and the golden clouds above. He exhaled and without really meaning to, started to laugh. It had worked. He held up the helmet, seeing his warped reflection in the golden lens. You need a name. A call sign. Izuku trailed off, mouth moving silently as he muttered names to himself, even as the sun slowly kissed the... That's it. Izuku grinned and pulled the helmet back on, before shifting to stand on still somewhat unsteady legs, his hands tight to the control rod to help keep his balance. He had his name. As he flew back, he tasted the word on his lips. Horizon. The edge of the sky. It felt right. Are you effing crazy? Izuku held up his hands as Bite grabbed him by the shirt, grinning sheepishly even as the manic gray eyes of his friend seemed to bleed red with his quirk. I knew you were working on refining the flight deck, but I didn't think you would fight heroes on it. I would like to say the dash. You are on the FNG news. Bite's eyes gleamed, flickers of red and gold and black streaming from his skin as his rage and worry overcame his control over his quirk. Izuku felt his mouth go dry, any humor and adrenaline from his flight curdling and turning to ash in his veins. Softly he spoke. I have video evidence that they attacked me unprovoked before I could explain myself. A beat of silence as the colors shifted, black and red turning to blue and yellow and purple. What? All told, it took less than an hour before several people gathered in the impromptu theater on the second floor of the mall, in what would have once been a furniture store. Bite grabbed a few people, and Izuku spent most of that time finding the footage, cleaning up its sound quality by adding in his helmet's mic audio, and cutting out some of the large gaps of him flying and testing stuff before he headed out. Combined with the POV of the helmet, the result was fairly impressive. As the video came to an end, the perspective twisting up to the sky as things blurred, the lights came back on. Solo, the drone racer who had helped him with control schematics, was the first to speak up. The man leaned against the couch in front of him, arms crossed as he squinted. That was aggravated assault by a hero? Right? I'm not FNG crazy here. That depends on the justification. They probably can argue that he evaded capture and had already disrupted the public peace, but that doesn't mean that MT Lady is in the clear. That first attack? That was definitely jumping the gun. Bite was on his laptop, clicking and scrolling through page after page of regulations and court cases. On top of that, there's the possibility of airspace violations, illegal tech, and even safety regulations. Izuku glanced up from his own laptop. Does it change this if I may or may not have applied for like 30 different licenses and certifications through the Tokyo Sports and Recreation Division? I have all the paperwork in a file. It also cost me like 25,000 yen to file all of them. I did it weeks ago. Send it to me. As the two exchanged information, Tetsu rose from his armchair, hands clamping on the cane in his hands as he leaned on it, eyes closed. He finally gave a soft huff and looked up. Sing Solo. Would you be willing to take some commission from me? Sure, boss, what do you need? Why wouldn't I? Solo was a tall, lean man. His long hair was dyed bright pink at the ends, and hung down his back in a braid. His eyes were covered by the large aviator sunglasses he wore to keep his sensitive eyes from hurting. In contrast to the fairly incognito Solo, Singh was a beautiful woman who drew the eye, her skin dusky with her Indian heritage and her left arm covered in an intricate depiction of the Vedic god of textiles, Vishnu. Even in the casual air of the lab, she wore practical but intricate clothes, the bright blue of a shawl draped over the gold and black of a kimono she had finished recently. Even standing there she was playing with cloth, a trio of threads forming and weaving a simple ribbon with an intricate pattern even as she focused on Tetsu. Wonderful. Solo, I want you to design a basic camera drone that Midoriya can build. Ask him for the specs of his power system. Make it something he can network with his VIs. Sing, I want you to make him a better jacket, give him an emblem. That design was catching the air enough to slow him down. Make him something a bit sleeker to cover the bodysuit. I don't want people to see his armor and decide to go around it. Solo and Sing nodded, both already clearly thinking of designs, and Tetsu turned to move to the other couch, ignoring Bite and Izuku as they began to argue about something, nodding in greeting to Epsilon. Ah, Marisuko-san. Would you be willing to use your quirk on Midoriya? Your full quirk. He kept his voice soft but sad. He knew that the young woman before him was afraid, but his worry for Izuku was almost as bad. The teal-haired nursing student went slightly pale and crossed her arms, tensing. As long as he agrees and is fully aware of the consequences and risks, I'll consider it. But he has to convince me. Understood. I'm sorry for asking, but he's an impulsive little jackass who needs all the help he can get, I understand. Sighing, Epsilon rubbed her eyes and waved Tetsu off. I'll draw up a contract for him. Go break up the morons before they start being stupid. He watched Epsilon walk out of the room, holding herself with a new layer of tension and uncertainty. It hurt to be reminded of when he had met her when she was just a teen who was getting blocked from medical programs. He turned to see Bite and Izuku still yelling at each other and focused on their conversation. Law of 2201 means that you can only get the JASMA regulation if you possess the qualifications. And I do. It specifically says that you can check with an online test, which I aced a few months back when I first designed the testing rig. Because of that, I'm up to code in everything but the experimental testing license, which is, in accordance with the rewrite of the Support Restriction Act, reserved for designing and registering support gear. Which, newsflash, the rig isn't support gear. I made sure of it. Bite rubbed his eyes, groaning. F-. Fine. You've found your loophole. They aren't going to stop trying to catch you, though. And every instance where you escape arrest is going to be another mark against you. You know, resisting arrest. Izuku grinned, feral and pleased. Heroes can't officially issue an arrest. Tetsu blinked, confused even as Bite's jaw dropped in surprise. What the F? In 2109, when the early days of the Hero Register first started, there was a massive debate going on. Where was the line between a cop and a hero? Izuku sat up and moved his laptop to the side, hands waving as he elaborated on the minutiae of hero law. Cops were up in arms and the civilians followed. The idea of the slowly forming pro-hero community replacing cops was a big worry, and there was plenty of pushback, including from the government and the old guard, who still viewed quirks as an anomaly. The police couldn't use their quirks offensively without a similar license to the heroes. Then why could heroes make arrests and open investigations without police training? The arguing on the issue slowed the entire system for over a decade, leaving early heroics in a weird mix where they either had to go to the police academy for years or act as vigilantes in all but name. Eventually, a compromise was established. Heroes could take into holding anyone who they caught in a criminal act, but they had to hand the suspect off to a proper member of the police force for processing. Until the cops are involved in the handling of a suspect, it's not an arrest, it's holding. Bite slumped, eyes wide as the implications hit him. Oh my god. You can't be charged. At all. Izuku's smile stretched wider. Nope. Uraraka Ochako blinked blearily as she woke up on a white bed, the soft beep of a machine to her side and the faint light of the evening sun shining through her window. She groaned and shoved herself up, eyes trying to focus. Ah, she hissed, a deep pain aching up her leg. She glanced and saw that from her knee down, her leg was wrapped in a splint and that the bit of skin she could see around her ankle was mottled with deep purple and red coloring. Ah, dearie. Glad to see you awake. The short form of recovery girl walked through the door, her cane tapping on the floor as she wandered close, peering from behind her glasses at her patient. How hurt was I? Did I pass? Oh, is the kid with the purple hair okay? Take it easy, dearie. You're fine, simply too tired after the exam for me to fully heal you. Your bones are set and already healing, but it'll be until the night passes before I consider you healed enough to leave. You're lucky only one leg broke and the other was merely sprained. Easy enough to fix. As she walked up and began prodding at Ochako's ankle, she looked away, the faint memories of what she last remembered coming forth. The purple-haired teen looked up at the robot in horror, eyes wide as he stumbled. She could see the building crack next to them and years of horror stories from her parents about falling supplies echoed through her head. A lunge got her close enough to grab his arm, her strained quirk flowing as she eliminated gravity, before yanking, sending him tumbling back down the street like a comet before the crash of stone replaced her world with pain and fear. As she let her thoughts wander, she barely noticed Recovery Girl puckering up before the world was so heavy. She was so sleepy. She was snoring before the minute was up, and Chio nodded, the tap of her cane the only sound as she left the room. Izuku yawned, unlocking his apartment door with ease as the dark sky cast the entry in shadow. After he and Bite had finished double-checking the legality, he had been swept up from one member of the lab to the next. From Sing checking his newest measurements to Solo asking for a demonstration of his power cells and thrusters to Tetsudano dragging him up to the roof to beat the impulsiveness out of him. He felt loose, free, as if parts of him could merely float away or slide through the stone of the nearest street. As he stepped into the apartment, he kicked off his shoes, skateboard hung quietly on the wall. He was about to head for his room when a package on the table near the door caught his eye. As well as the names. To Midoriya Izuku. From Midoriya Hisashi. Blinking, Izuku saw there was an empty letter with his mom's name under it, visible tear stains of emotion dotting the page. Reaching out hesitantly, Izuku ran his fingertips over the smooth cardboard of the box before lifting the surprisingly heavy package and walking to his room. He set it down with a sigh and looked around. A moment of searching drawers and he pulled a precision knife and sliced through the seals. When he cracked the box open, he found a sealed, black case. Rapping his knuckles against it, he blinked before lifting the case from the box. The case was a perfect square, with two small handles on the sides and a black circle where the latch should have been. What in the... Pressing on the black circle, there was a sting before he jerked his hand back, skinging on the now sliced open bed of his thumb. He glanced back just in time for the circle to flash green and unlock with a click. As the case cracked open, Izuku felt a sudden surge of anticipation. There, in the case, were two black, fingerless gloves, layered with thick plates of material almost like armor, the wrist long enough to stretch nearly to his elbow. And on top of it was a note. Dear Izuku, I wish I could speak to you in person. That I could hug and be with you, but trying to get off Island when I've been labeled a high-value asset is a nightmare. Even getting this to you took far too long and far too much effort. I've written this letter at least a dozen times. Each time with a different year, a different idea, a different desire and piece of advice, and each time it never seems to reach you. But, thankfully, the drop-in box Inko setup is allowed. I've heard so much about you. About your dreams and desires, about the trials this world has thrown at you. About how bright your smile. How loud you laugh. How smart you are. I know you want to be a hero, and I wish I could have gotten these to you years ago. The island security has fought me for years, making me redesign and develop these a dozen times over, until there was nothing that was patented by anyone but me. But I got there. Something Island has no rule over. That the SRA can't stop me from passing on. I know you don't have a quirk, but don't ever let anyone tell you that is the end of the equation. Take these gloves and the thumb drive under them, and take the world by storm. They are my magnum opus, my greatest achievement bar only one. You are what surpassed everything else. My job, my money, my fame? I would give it all to keep you safe, but sadly the world doesn't work like that. I only hope this reaches you in time for the UA entrance exam. And remember, while I may breathe fire like a dragon of myth, you can control a far stronger force. Your father, Hisashi. P.S. Be careful around electronics with them until you figure out control. Be safe. And keep the explosions outside. Izuku shook, feeling the sting of tears run down his face. Dead. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. As he slid to the floor, legs refusing to support him, he could only press his palms to his eyes and fight the urge to scream. But why is it always too little, too late? If the package had gotten her faster. If the bureaucracy was a little looser. If there was but the smallest bit of good luck coming his way. But no. He wasn't that lucky. He wasn't lucky at all. As his tears began to flow, he felt the rage, the hate, the spite. It burned like the stars, screaming into the dark of space. Izuku glanced around, hands tensed. He wasn't at the Mustafa lab. He hadn't slept. He had cried and silently raged. And when the rage had faded, he had pulled the crippled laptop with all his father's research from where it had been hidden and opened the thumb drive. Turns out he was his father's son in more than just intelligence, but also with their fields of study. He had stayed up and read through pages and pages of code and testing logs and instruction manuals. When his mom had woken up, and he had seen her off with a strained smile, he had gone back to his room. A shower, a change of clothes, and grabbing the box with the gloves and the laptop, sliding them into his messenger bag. He had taken off aimlessly. At first, he considered the beach, but the reminder that it was no longer a place he was welcome sent him off in a different direction. And so he found himself here. Morning Star Labs. He pushed through the rusty gate, kicking his board up and pacing through the empty lot back to the loading bays. A moment to remember the code and he was inside, closing the door behind him. In the early dawn, the skylights of the main room barely cast enough light to see by, but Izuku was more than able to deal. He set the laptop to the side, turned off just in case, before walking to the center of the cleared-off space. And then he pulled out the gloves, hands tracing the sturdy synthetic armor that ran across the mechanisms below. He was hesitant, but he was also so tired of being afraid. He pulled the gloves on and made sure they were snug, feeling as the material stretched and then settled, conforming to the shape of his wrists. Holding his hands up, he breathed deep and clenched his hands into fists, flexed them as far as they could go, and clenched them again. Across the gloves, traceries of red appeared, and a stinging sensation raced across his wrists and up across his hands under the synthetic gloves. He breathed out, hissing at the sting. The red flickered to green, before shifting to a deep neon blue. Before, there were merely lines, now intricate designs began to form, lights glowing as holographic sigils began to circle and wreath his hands. Over his right hand, lines of code began to appear, before settling into a small circle of information. EMF interface online. User, Midoriya Izuku, recognized administration privileges granted. Would you like to initiate a tutorial? Izuku looked at it, and slowly gave a thumbs up, and grinned when the display flashes green. Initiating tutorial. Toshinori glanced up, seeing the gathering clouds on the horizon as they began to drift in. He had taken Mirio out early, hoping to get plenty of training in before the incoming storm that had been on the forecast got into town. And work young Mirio did. Already the cleared section of the beach was spreading, racing from the stairwell outwards through the wall of trash. As Mirio carried yet another pile of trash, crushed tightly for the truck to carry, All Might glanced at his phone, thumb flickering through the daily news, before he paused. Race through the city? Toshinori flicked through the article, noting how both MT Lady and Kamui Woods had responded to the incident, before finally catching a somewhat clean image of the perp. Sleek gold and black, flickering wisps of blue, that helmet. The kid. The one who had been on the beach, who had known him from somewhere. He would need to inform Tsukachi about this and get his information to the investigation. Mirio called out to him, and All Might looked up. We're finishing up for the day, my boy. One last trip to the dump and then I'll drop you off at the agency. Let's go. He helped strap down the load of trash to the truck bed. Behind him, in the distant storm front, a flicker of lightning began to spark across the horizon. Izuku marveled at the new sensation. The buzz and flicker of energy that he could feel, could touch. It was everywhere, and with his gloves he could sense it. Patterns in the air, in the light and sound. Electromagnetic fields. A flicker of his ring finger and the lights of his glove poured out once more, echoing and reflecting off the Earth's own EM field. It was like dropping ink into a current, seeing the layers of motion. Feeling them. He let the lights fade, but slowly the sensation was becoming more natural. More familiar. Under his gloves, dozens of points thinner than any needle, almost like the filaments of a jellyfish, reached into his skin, sinking into his nerves and muscles. They read and learned from the sparks of synapses, tuning their data to that of Izuku's own body with each passing twitch and shift. Izuku paused and looked at the long disconnected lights that hung across the room. Breathing slow, he held his hand out, pointing with his index and middle fingers as he narrowed his focus. Church. He could feel it. Church. The EMF field, the ionosphere. the living pulse and static of the planet itself, of the sun and galaxy in motion. He could feel as it shifted, as the drivers, the dozens of microscopic pieces of energy conducting and controlling parts, more advanced than anything he had ever seen, his father's magnum opus. Damn it, charge. It sparked and flowed, and with his thoughts, his muscles, he directed it. A flicker. A spark. Izuku could only laugh. The light, long disused, began to glow, powered by the earth itself. And then, with a twitch too far, it snapped. The bulb shattered, breaking Izuku into manic giggles. That's what Dad's message was warning about. Izuku's eyes gleamed in the blue glow of the gloves, and he reached out. Practice makes perfect. Another light began to gleam, and Izuku focused. His rage and spite were not needed here. His poisonous drive was useful, and it was there, but this was melancholy in its own way. His grief sparked instead. His regrets. His lost dreams and mischances. He fed it all into the flow. Into the sparks and gleams. Every shattered light was another lost chance. Each explosion of incandescent sparks a painful thought, a lost fight, a painful comment. But the euphoria, the rising hum of hope. It was embedded in the rising current he was becoming more and more aware of. In the static of the airwaves, the flicker of the sun's light and the oncoming tang of ozone in the storm. That only grew more defined. Uraraka sighed as he walked down the street. Her clothes had been cleaned and returned to her, and Recovery Girl had given her concussion a clean bill of health. With the coming storm, she had only a few hours to get to the empty apartment in her parents' most recently constructed building. She had permission to camp out there for a while longer, depending on if she makes it into UA. She blinked, however, when she turned the corner and staggered straight into someone a touch taller than her. "Oh shit, sorry. Didn't see ya there." No, my fault. Wait." She blinked, seeing purple hair in unruly spikes, even as his eyes widened back at her. Purple hair. Gravity Girl? Uraraka had only been told in passing that the other competitors had been safe, in part because of her actions. Seeing that for herself settled the faint sense of unease in her chest. "I'm glad to see you, up and about." Rubbing his neck nervously, the purple teen glanced away sheepishly. "Sorry about getting you hurt like Dash." "It's fine. You would have done the same for me, right?" Uraraka gave a soft smile. "I just hope I did enough to make it into the hero course, you know?" At that the purple-haired teen's expression fell. "Well, I know I didn't. I only got about 4 points." "Wait, really? God, I'm so sorry. Here I am talking about my performance and I'm so Dash." "It's fine, really," he sighed. "I knew it was a long shot, so I applied to the General Studies course as well. I hope you get in." "Oh, I never got your name." "Uraraka Ochako, pleased to meet you." He gave a wan smile. "Shinso Hitoshi. Pleasure's all mine." Above them, a crack of thunder rang out, a prelude to the storm. "Do you want to get a drink? I want to talk to you and, well, the storm's coming in." Uraraka blushed at how forward she felt she was being and was gratified when high on Shinsu's cheek color darkened. "Do you like coffee?" Izuku lay on his back on the dusty concrete, eyes closed. Around him, the lights of the manufacturing bay were shattered, except for one, directly above him, which slowly glowed and faded, in time with his breathing. He could feel the storm, the intensity of the world raging in the sky. Like a music concert, pulsing against his hands. Like he had been deaf and blind to it before, but now there was a new layer of reality to listen to. New genres to explore. He chuckled softly, and let his eyes drift open, sitting up as he stared down at his hands. He closed each finger on his right hand in sequence, thumb to pinky, and then opened them pinky to thumb. With a soft beep, the glove loosened, and he tugged it off. The inner layer had dissolved against his skin, but he could see it now. Puncture wounds along the back of his arms, 3 lines of them. More across his hand and palm, and around his first knuckles. Each was surrounded by a faint smear of red, evidence of the impromptu surgery that embedded his new senses into his nervous system. Microscopic neodymium magnetic couplings, implanted around the nervous system, provide the reaction basis for the gloves. provides the feedback and information to use the gloves. He held up the glove itself and slowly opened the casing. There, gleaming with faint energy, was the core of the gloves. Long flat devices that looked almost like leaves or arrowheads. Electromagnetic manipulation cores. The design was miles above anything Izuku had ever seen. They drew and condensed the Earth's natural electromagnetic field before directing it and increasing it. And he had the blueprints on the laptop. Clipping the glove's casing back together, he slowly pulled the glove back on, flexing to turn it on. They were his now. Bound to him with blood and biometrics and the magnets under his skin. His father's gift was permanent, after all. It was up to him to integrate them into his own plans. And he had plans. He was suddenly very glad he had hardened most of the electronics in his testing rig. He was expecting quite a lot of experimentation to take place very soon. Pausing, he decided to test another feature. Reaching out, he aimed at his skateboard, set to the side of the open space, and made a clenching motion, fingers like a claw as he made a yanking motion towards himself. And the skateboard rolled to him, twisting as the magnetic grip hooked on the wheel trucks, dragging it towards him. Heh, use the force, Izu. God, you're such a nerd, Dad. A tear ran down his cheek, and his breath caught. He had almost forgotten that. Him and his dad. Sitting there, during a storm, watching those really old American sci-fi movies. Star Wars. Star Trek. Firefly. Dozens of others. I want to make a world like these. I want to see the world be this amazing. Izuku stepped out of the warehouse, tear tracks dried, and looked up. The storm had arrived. He could feel it, sense the crack and flicker of the electrons, held high above him. How the ground ached for the charge of the storm. As the rain fell, his tears were washed away, and in their wake he felt renewed. Tear away the rust. The clutter, Izuku murmured, letting the rain soak him, dripping down his skin. The dust of the warehouse that had clung to his clothes was washed away, and with it his stress. He felt drained, and yet it was almost like waking after a stressful day, and finding the aches had faded. He chuckled and dropped his head. As the crack of thunder rang out, Izuku looked back at the warehouse. But his eyes were looking beyond the rust and disuse. He did need a bigger workshop. The testing rig was almost too large for his workspace at the labs. And besides, he did own the building, he would have to work on it. Stepping back inside, Izuku stopped thinking about what was lost. And instead, he let the storm carry him to what came next. 3 days after the entrance exam. Monday. FING boring sheet. Another 2 weeks of school until I get my DMN results, and it's another 2 weeks after that before FINGUA actually starts. Bakugu slumped into the classroom and crashed into his usual chair, kicking his feet up on the desk and looking around. No worthless Deku. Glancing down, he double-checked that all his homework from the break was finished and ready to be handed out, and kicked back to think about his performance at the entrance exam. He had felt like it was good, that he had excelled against all those useless extras. He knew he had definitely broken the most of the bots. He was so lost in thought that it wasn't until classes had already started he realized that Deku was still not in his seat. Where is the effing nerd? Izuku breathed out, his breath misting in the early spring chill as he stood across from his sensei. His hands had started to ache, not just from the weight of the dull training blade, but also from the way his new senses were going haywire as soon as he neared his sensei. It was like standing on a boat in the middle of a storm, feeling the currents flickering back and forth as the wind dragged at him. As he set his stance, legs apart and blade held low, he breathed deeply. Tetsu held his blade higher, a classic kendo stance as he looked at the young man. Izuku felt it before it happened. The faintest flicker of magnetic energy, the slight forewarning as the dulled blade slashed out at neck level. But another blade rose to meet in a clang of steel, before both caught and held, even as Izuku stepped closer and shifted to drag his blade along Sensei's. Good. Read it. Your father may have given you a new sense, but you must be the one to learn how to see with it. To hear it. It had taken less than 2 minutes before the old man had realized what Izuku had done to himself. And even less before the old man declared he would teach Izuku how to read and understand the magnetic fields around him. He had apparently decided the best teacher was sparring while he threw the EMF waves around Izuku out of balance in an effort to distract him. Panting, Izuku raised his sword back up and stepped back, moving clear of Tetsu's reach and leveling the blade. Now again! Izuku never did go back to Alderaan Middle School. He had already taken his finals ahead of time, and with the transfer to online schooling, he had no reason to go back. Izuku glanced up, rubbing the ache from his eyes. As the beeper of the 3D printer signaled that it finished, its current project rang out. He unlatched the glass case and swung it wide, reaching out to unhook the base of his current design from the floor. He held it up gently, taking in the various pieces that were currently laying flat. But he knew how they connected. In his eyes, he could see it. The 3 thrusters that ringed the central computer core. The mount for the high-speed cameras. The antenna and communications arrays would sit around it, and the 3 pieces of metal plate that would protect and balance it, as well as acting as mounts for the hexagonal solar cells. Pulling it out, he arrayed the pieces in the box where he had the other 3 sets he had made so far. His current plans required 6, each of them networked through Wayfinder for mapping and environmental tracking. He sat back down and reset the machine for another print. Looking at his laptop, the new design was coming together. The data that he had processed from his test flight was being refined, built upon as he plotted out a much bigger project. But he needed more data. He needed to push his gear to its limits, to truly see where the faults lay. He had ideas on how to do that, but the way to pull it off would be finicky at best. He tapped back out from the design project and over to the online schooling program, taking a break from coding and engineering to clean through a few classes worth of mathematics. Boring, and way too easy. It wasn't rocket science, after all. Saturday. Izuku stretched, taking in his newly tailored outfit. The jacket still hung loose, but where before it was almost like a concealing shroud around his torso, now it hung lower, belted to his waist, and with each of the 2 long tails clipped to the back of his boots, keeping the outfit from catching the wind too easily. The shoulders, upper arms, and center of his back had all been covered with layers of the solar cells, wired into a slender battery and computer that nestled under the jacket in the small of his back. It, combined with the helmet, made his suit nearly self-sufficient. As long as the sun was out, he could charge on the run, and with the computer's help, he could be tracked by the custom GPS that was routed through the survey drones. That would be following his flight path. Aside from that, his boots had been overhauled, the metal greaves taking a sleeker appearance of flowing curved outer panels to help hide the fact he had only made them thicker and taller, bracing his thighs up to his knees. They also had their own battery packs installed, allowing them to be used without the board. A lesson Izuku learned quickly when he accidentally stuck himself to a metal sheet in the unfinished half of the mall, 7 feet off the ground. He had to wait 4 hours for that battery charge to end, so he could rewrite the end step code right. 'Cause pressure pads apparently worked differently upside down. Under everything, his impact suit had remained, the gold and black of the material padding reinforcing and pressurizing against his skin, making sure that his body could absorb and resist the immense G-forces of acceleration and turning that he was putting himself through. The last piece was also the first he had built, even before planning the board itself. The helmet in his hands wasn't the original. That had been stripped and destroyed and rebuilt a dozen times already. This one was the same form-fitting shape, the long arc of gleaming gold that marked the lens, and the crest of solar cells that lined the top. It had more of a collar as well, hanging lower, another adjustment to protect his neck and spine from acceleration. Izuku twisted it around and checked the small pair of air canisters that were hidden under that jaw were intact, as well as the modified air filter and voice changers were in place. Nodding, Izuku pulled on the helmet, and when he looked out, Horizon stood ready. The hiss of his neck brace and helmet connection was music to his ears, and for a moment, the world was gold-tinted silence. Beginning startup. As lines of code began to scroll, and each piece of his gear chimed off, he stepped out of the small area he had changed in, and onto the stage of the mall's theater. Where once lines of chairs had been meant to be installed, the concrete of the floor was covered in beanbag chairs and couches, with the stand behind them turned into computer bank after computer bank. This was the mall's server farm. One of the services that kept the whole place running. They ran gaming servers, a VPN service, and a dozen other minor projects off these servers. The entire thing is a cobbled mess of high-end parts and low-end customization. But today, there was a new set of tables, and a solid dozen computers were laid out. Projectors were aimed at the old screen's blank wall, long painted white for movie nights. This was mission control. And as Izuku stepped out, the members of the Tinker Space who had helped him get here looked at him, before a cheer went up. Whistles and laughter rang out, and Bite stepped to hug him tight, before leaning back and giving him a glance. "Well, aren't you snazzy-looking, space kid?" Izuku could only grin, voice ringing out clearly, but with a tone that sounded far older from the speakers of the helmet. "I think I look pretty awesome. Thank you guys. All of you." The chatter of rejected praise, or in a few cases bragging, rang out, and Izuku rubbed the back of his head with his hands, sporting only a thin pair of golden gloves. "All right, you hooligans and roustabouts," Tetsu spoke up, drawing the rest of the gathered geeks' attention. "It's time. Get set up." And like that, the air went from celebratory to ecstatic. Izuku glanced at the massive computer towers, 3 of which had become the new hosts for the VIs that ran the board. As screens came to life and chatter rang out, with Bite and Solo taking up the 2 central computer consoles, while the rest settled in. Izuku headed towards the emergency exit, only to glance back as a flicker of EMF hit his senses. His eyes found Tetsu, and the old man met his gaze, before mouthing something that set Izuku's heart racing and put him into sheer focus. "I'm proud, kid." With a deep breath, Izuku pushed through the door into the small courtyard beyond, and where the board was waiting. "Testing, testing, testing. This is base to horizon, check check." Bite's voice came through loud and clear, and Izuku gave a thumbs up to his helmet camera. "Check check, I read you clearly." "Awesome, and video is coming in clear and strong." "Checks are clear. Wayfinder is connected with the drone array." "Now." Izuku glanced around with awe as the 6 drones around the courtyard began to vibrate, before floating up. Small twisted cylinders that rose and swirled back and forth, before stabilizing. "Drones are up, looks clear from the ground." Solo's voice came over next. This was his contribution after all. "Gotcha, drones green across the board. Tracking software has pinged ya, but I'm not setting them to follow until you get up and going." "Got it, base." "Initiating startup. This is testing rig, hoverboard, Mark 14. The code shall be hover 1 for future conversation. Acknowledge." "Acknowledged, hover 1 is acknowledge. This is public flight, first flight with drone cameras. Going live in 3. Izuku stepped on the board, his pre-flight checks done before he put the suit on. 2. He felt the click of his boots, the whir as the engines began to connect, as the handle in his grip began to vibrate with the faint buzz of the mechanics adjusting to his weight. 1. Izuku breathed in and exhaled. Fire. He slammed the thrusters on and shot up, the flare of blue energy making his new senses flare like he was standing in a rock concert. The EMF waves were like spring rain, and he couldn't help but laugh in sheer thrill. As he took off, the red dot on his helmet, with the words, "Live," blinked on. On an innocuous social media profile, a now streaming notification went out. The notification linked to a smaller website, hosted off a secure connection and with only a few pages of information. And on a HeroTube channel, a series of videos went live. All of them with faces blurred out, even as the time lapses of the hoverboard's creation and early testing, and an annotated recording of a hoverboard against Pro Heroes went live. All of the accounts were under the same title. The same name. The Star-Driven, Horizon, Island. Melissa Shields sighed and tucked her tablet back into her bag. She just couldn't focus. Not on the Hopskipper project, or on the results of her latest materials study on the memory materials she had sent in for testing. She still thought about the prototypes she had built for Uncle All Might to use, and the one that still sat in her closet. Some days she wondered about how strong he was. About how such an insane level of power must feel to have it rest in your muscles and bones. Or even for Professor Midoriya and his quirk. She had been distracted more than once by the gleam of heat in his jaws whenever he got excited, the traces of smoke that would follow him around when he got distracted. The many times he had laughed or sneezed only to release puffs of bright curling flame and sparks. So many people took their quirk for granted, and yet she could only feel. Maybe not jealousy, but perhaps curiosity. She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder to head out. The workshop she was in had been a nice place to work quietly, but right now she wanted to just get moving. It was only a few minutes into her walk, however, when she heard raised voices arguing. The materials you used were Island property. She glanced around the corner to see a very smug-looking Professor Midoriya standing facing a bureaucratic-looking man in a suit. Actually, I purchased them with my own money and time. Much like I would for personal effects for my quarters, and the designs are of my own personal register. Nothing I sent out was built or researched with Island property. And what was it? The scans showed no power source or active energy signature. No power source? But I thought that energy systems were Mr. Midoriya's specialty? Midoriya laughed. It doesn't have a built-in power source. As for what it actually does, that's personal. Why would I tell you? It's not Island business. All you need to know is it's a late birthday present for my son. Something I expect he'll use to great effect. The suit grimaced and then snarled. I'll be requiring your current work files. Consider yourself currently under internal audit. Hisashi gave a faint snarl back, his backlit by gleaming embers in his throat. By all means, I doubt that you'll find anything, however. My computers are clean. A grimace and the security guard and the suit pushed past the professor, who gave one last lingering glance, jaw glowing with repressed heat. It wasn't until the bureaucrat and his guard were around the corner that Midoriya-sensei gave a puff of smoke and turned back. Melissa heard the mutter he gave before stepping out of the hallway back into his office. Nothing left on the island for you all to find. It's all with my son now. Son? Isn't his son quirkless, like me? What was he given? And why are the administrators so upset about it? She was barely halfway to the door outside when raised voices got her attention once more. Did he seriously just dodge that? How fast was he? Two classmates of hers were clustered around a laptop. As she peeked over, her eyes could only widen, as a man on a hoverboard danced and flipped past buildings. Horizon ducked and bobbed the board, moving with grace as he circled through the neighborhoods of Mizudafu Ward, making his way towards the longer streets that bordered the downtown section of the district. As he neared the street he was aiming for, he tilted the board, going nearly horizontal, holding on with the grip of his boots and the control rod, as the board swerved and slingshot around the corner. "Hoo!" As Izuku shouted out, he felt the rush of acceleration pull at him. His new coat wasn't catching the air, so much as guiding it past him, pushing the current into a slipstream around him. He swayed left and right, letting himself settle on the board once more before he crouched and took off faster, staying above the street lights and the cars below him as he pushed the engines faster and faster. Airspace ahead is clear, and the heroes are still struggling to catch up. You're cleared for acceleration up to level 8. See how it goes, yeah? Izuku grinned under his helmet and gave a confirmation before crouching along the board, bracing with one hand on the front handle while the other tightened on the stick shift. With a twist, he unlocked the limiter that kept him at level 3. The device was simple, a carefully milled ring with notches at the distance for each acceleration threshold, or level. The comfortable speed for navigation and maneuvering was a 3, but as he unlocked the ring, he spun it to the next level and yanked the trigger to accelerate. As the world at the edges of his vision began to blur, Izuku could only watch the speedometer spike. Level 3, 200 kmph. Level 4, 260. Level 5, 300. Izuku could feel the increased pressure build as he moved faster and faster. 6 is 370. 7 is 415. 8 is to 470. As the edges of his vision began to narrow, he tightened his grip, the board slowly beginning to vibrate as the air buffer began to take effect, the metal and engines moving faster than the air could compress and flow around it, the effect of drag beginning to overcome the energy that his thrusters could comfortably output at these levels as he slowly rose further from the street. The shockwave of his passage catching and billowing with loose papers as he heard the rapid Doppler effect of a car alarm flash by. Going to 9. Heard and confirmed. Increase, now. With a grin, he increased the lock force on his boots and his hand went white with exertion as he kicked it up another notch. Level 9. At the moment, this was just below the theoretical max safe speed for the testing board. After this, level 10 would drain the capacitors in under 5 minutes, and the level 11 would likely reduce at least one engine to molten slag. Even now, Izuku could see the faint heat haze as the outboard thrusters began to glow a dull red from the sheer friction of his acceleration and the internal kinetic force being converted to thermal energy. Thrusters are hitting redline 1, roll it back to at least 5. Heard and copied. Dropping to 5. As the move slowed, Izuku began to let the board sway and bounce off the airwaves. Gold alert is on, 3 obstacles coming up in 15 seconds at current speed. Advise left turn on the crossroads in 3, 2, 1 dash. On the count, Izuku gave a wide sway and then dove around to the left, once more surfing the board so the larger thruster on the base could speed up the acceleration, before cutting down a narrow side street that took a long circle through the old market district just off downtown Mizudafu. He actually knew this street. There was an old used computer store he had raided for parts a couple times. As he dove, he checked the ever-useful height gauge in his HUD. Thanks to Wayfinder, it had a clear height tracker which would help avoid power lines, street lights, and various banners and wires that laced the streets and roofs of Mizudafu. As he dropped, a flash of light over the nearby buildings, and he glanced off to his right, where a hero was racing over the roofs towards the street he had turned down. As the man leapt, shiny white armor and smooth cannon hand raised, Izuku smirked. Hero on my tail. It's Airjet. Can I get a hijack to his comms? On it. He's recorded to be a match for level 5. You've got a dance on your hands, Horizon. Wouldn't have it any other way. Izuku locked his speed and gave a peace sign to the hero on his tail. Whatever he was shouting was lost to the winds, until with a beep, he heard the hero loud and clear over his comms. Lion, you are currently in an airspace violation dash. Yeesh, can you quiet down and let me talk for a moment? Through a small screen window that flashed across the bottom of his visor, Izuku could see the rear camera of his helmet catch as Airjet almost staggered from the comment in his ear. He knew that the hero's helmet had a loudspeaker, but Izuku was now hacked directly into the man's comm beat. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to listen to ya, but I can't hear you outside our comms at this speed. Also, duck. Izuku grinned and yanked the handle in a quick arc, thumbing a switch at the same time. The board twisted as he flipped upside down and skimmed off the bottom of a small decorated archway between 2 old buildings. Gah! Stop the board! Izuku finished the barrel roll and kicked the engine back to full, pushing up with time to clear a bundle of wires as he pushed forwards, seeing the hero in his rear camera mantle over the bridge, having fallen behind. Give me a good reason to. As Izuku grinned into his mic, a number at the top corner of his vision ticked up. Viewers, 201. As Airjet leapt after him, Izuku darted away, a high-stakes game of tag through the streets and buildings of Mizudafu Ward. Nedzu was entranced. He had been waiting for such a return from the hoverboard-riding young man, tuning and preparing his search algorithms. But he wasn't expecting the alert from his system to be a live stream, and certainly didn't expect his customary hacking and backtracking to run headfirst into a mess of firewalls and false leads so complex that its source was reading as being in every city between Tokyo and the ocean at once, crisscrossed and lacing across and around Mizudafu Ward. Even narrowing his search to the district, it just became more and more convoluted. The signal from the hoverboard was bouncing among at least 6 moving and shifting computers that were in turn throwing data to and from a dozen different routers, often logging into a multitude of public routers, from cafes and diners to hotels and even the phone network. Beyond that, the information was using 2 separate sets of asymmetric encryption. All the data leaving or passing out of the board and the 6, what he believed to be, drones was encrypted with a paired system. Only having the 2 encryption keys, used in the right order, would unlock the information. And there was a lot of information. The hoverboard was passing on its own onboard data, which Nedzu could make an educated guess was mostly maintenance and telemetry data. but the drones were sending out data bursts that had more in line with military-grade sensors. Glancing between both the live stream and the data he was receiving didn't quite help. He had found out that the drones clearly had cameras installed, professional quality too, providing sweeping aerial shots and a few cunningly executed tracking shots through the streets, spliced together on the fly with the footage from Horizon's helmet. The stream was also on a 5-minute delay, giving whatever group of hackers and editors were working on it time to toss up some interesting graphics. From floating numbers regarding how fast the board was going, to a small profile on Airjet when he appeared. Nedzu even caught himself chuckling as a momentary snapshot of Airjet jerking in surprise popped up, head with a massive red exclamation mark edited above it. He remembered when the hero was a student who first made his jetpack. There were a lot of crashes in his first few years. Regardless, Nedzu continued his attempts at tracking the signals, while also trying to work out where the resources for this newfound group came from. A beep coincided with his system opening up a new window, and he blinked. Registrations in the Muzutafu Airspace Ministry? As Nedzu opened up the new files, he couldn't hold back a raucous laugh. It's all legally authorized. He decided, however, he should double-check. As he began searching for the licenses and documentation for Horizon Tech, which was the name the documentation was apparently filed under, Nedzu also composed a message for Power Loader. He had a feeling he would need help decrypting the rat's nest of signals. Somewhere in Muzutafu Ward, Izuku darted low, as Airjet cursed and went high, avoiding a rat's nest of power lines that crossed the street. Just stop running. First, I'm not running. Second, I refuse to be unlawfully detained by anyone, hero or otherwise. With a whine of air pressure, Airjet fired another blast of compressed air past Izuku, aiming for his board. A twist, a shift, and he was out of the blast angle, but he could still see the hero trying to catch up. Horizon, there's more heroes incoming from ahead. Get clear in the next 30 seconds. Izuku nodded, and began to plot his escape. Airjet can move fast, but that's only by channeling his quirk into his jetpack, and he can't both channel his quirk to the pack and charge his arm cannon at the same time. I could just ramp up and out at level 8 and not have to worry about it, but the more I do that the more likely I'll get tracked back to the base. Better do something a bit more complicated. As Airjet leapt, cutting power to charge his cannon again, Izuku took his chance. The board twisted, thrusters staggering in their ignition as he twisted, the board shifting and twisting with him as he pulled a 180, the force making his legs nearly buckle even as he felt a faint groan from the board, the twist putting all his forward momentum into a strain that nearly ripped him from the surface. Ow, this hurts. Note to self to practice this and check the spinal supports. As Airjet lined up his shot, Izuku breathed deep and kicked the board back up to level 7, feeling the angry JRK of the thrusters as they skipped a gear entirely. I'll give you some TLC soon. Just keep it together dash. As Izuku shot off, ducking to dodge the incoming air blast, he felt the world start to blur, the cars parked along the street below him going off as the gleaming blue ion streams of his engines caused waves of air pressure to dance through the street. As Airjet tried to set for a second shot, the ion drives finally engaged. See ya, hero. As Izuku became a streak once more, Airjet scrambled to twist and shift, the backwash of Izuku's jet stream sending him off balance. By the time the hero got his bearings, the gleam of Horizon was already back down the street, and with a twist was darting back and up through the buildings and rooftops, heading back out to the coast. Horizon, this is base, we're reading some stress marks along the board sides, confirm? Izuku glanced down and cursed. Horizon to base, can confirm. The last twist was too hard for the alloy to handle without some minor deformation. We're gonna have to do maintenance when I get back. Planning to swing wide over the water, confirm? Confirmed. We'll keep the door open and the coffee warm. And to all our audience, see you later. Remember to shoot for the stars. Choking back a laugh as Izuku shot from the taller buildings and out over the residential areas of the city, Izuku could see the distant gleams of the drones as they began to head back towards base, cutting low and through side streets to avoid being seen. Well said, base. Have a nice night, everyone. Nedzu sipped his tea pensively, looking over the 3 videos that were playing silently, captions rolling under them. The first one was a montage, sped-up security camera footage of a teen with an edited-over mask moving around a workshop as he tinkered with the hoverboard. Occasionally the video froze, and markers popped up. Ion Engine MK 8.1, 300+ hours of development, 38 failed attempts, 7 explosive failures, 81 hours of field testing. Geometric terrain sensors, MK 3.3, range of 120 meters. There were more. Little boxes that described what the material composition was, that laid out what type of computer banks were used, how the cooling system worked, the custom gyroscopic controllers. None of it was given the level of technical detail needed to disable them, but the fact that it showed the teen, who was clearly Horizon himself, crafting and assembling every component of his board was important. The second was another montage, this one clearly from a beach covered in junk. Dagobah Beach had taken Nedzu less than 10 minutes to identify. In it, the form of Horizon was practicing his skills, and the hour-long video may as well have been a fail compilation. Multiple times that video showed the same editing style, though this one was much more comedic. A freeze frame of the board spinning, with Horizon flailing his arms as he was twisted and slammed into the water, with the caption, "Crash 75, dislocated ankle, broken rib, mild concussion," before it showed Horizon marching back out, the change of weather, camera angle, and lighting clearly showing that it had been a different day. That time he was thrown off the board as it bucked and sent him catapulted out to sea. The final video was playing on repeat. The first clash of Horizon and a hero. With every legal mistake highlighted and annotated. Nedzu himself could only wince at the conclusions that he could see. While Kamui Woods and MT Lady had been given the right to intervene, they had jumped the gun with that first assault. The fact that Horizon had been willing to communicate was highlighted and marked. He doubted that the two would be having good words with their lawyers anytime soon. Letting out a hum of consideration, he looked at the documentation that he had pulled up on the rest of the holographic display. Registration, licensing, intellectual property laws, patents. All of them floated around him as he pawed through the laws and bylaws. While the entirety of the licenses aren't absolutely foolproof, and a lawyer could likely unravel Horizon's legal case, the sheer variety covered all of the teens, and yes, it was a teen action so far. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't even a vigilante. Legally, the teen may as well be an innocent with a death wish. Nedzu's contemplation was broken, one of the screens signaling an incoming video call. Ah, perfect. Accepting the call, the screen shifted to show Majima Higuri, better known to most as the pro hero, Power Loader. Right now, Higuri wasn't dressed in his usual hero outfit, but instead in an oil-stained blue t-shirt and jeans, his orange hair tied back and blue eyes gleaming with a manic energy. Nedzu. What the F-dashed? Let it never be said Higuri didn't speak his mind. So you've been reading the documentation I sent you? The kid, and it is a kid, is FNG insane. I saw the tech video too. The sheet he's pulling off? The designs he's making? They should be college thesis projects. For the top of the class at Tokyo Tech. He should be being scouted by goddamn everyone. The hero ran his hand through his hair with a manic look. God, I've been trying to work out the basics of what the F his tech is. Ion engines? I've been cracking open textbooks that have been sitting on my shelf for almost a decade. No one, and I mean no one I've ever seen with the possible exception of Midoriya on I-Island has energy work like this. That sounded almost familiar. Midoriya? Would this be Midoriya Hisashi? Nedzu glanced at a new screen as he ran a search on the name. Yeah, he was leading the energy and power development before the SRA and I-Island picked him up. Do you think that someone may have found his old research? No way. Hisashi's higher-level stuff had crazy high security. Hell, I know for a fact he's been working on the I-Island Cold Fusion project, and that he's got the same level of security that David Shield has. Nedzu glanced back at the screen, sipping at his tea. Interesting. Swinging back around to Horizon, what do you think of it from a legal standpoint? That he's spitting in the face of the SRA, and then kicking them in the ball to finish up. This whole social media thing? That's a public record. I glanced at their forums recently and people are fuming about it. Nedzu couldn't help his scoff. He remembered how he had helped set the original SRA in motion after his rescue from the experimentation labs over a decade ago. His SRA proposal had been comprehensive, secure, and commercially viable. And then the politicians buried it in the mess they had now. Out of curiosity, why is there no current research into the board's technology? Higuri gave a scoff. 'Cause everything before you reach the complexity of Horizon's board is either too big for personal use, or not flashy enough to be marketable. Solar and clean energy are popular, but heavily commercialized. Beyond that, most of the support gear that does flight like this is all Quark-derived. Like Airjet's pack. Nedzu pet his head, staring at the video call. And Horizon's technology isn't Quark-derived? Not that I can see. A lot of the research that clarified those principles was Quark-derived from what I'm reading. Something about a pair of brothers some 100 years ago who had ion manipulation quirks who proved some theories and clarified some of the science. They helped design and build the Swedish ion array, which powers a couple cities in Europe. From what I can make out, Horizon figured out how to compact and miniaturize the process, along with something else. That blue effect that you can see in his chase videos is some form of EMF field that's bouncing along the ion trails he leaves behind, but I can't make out how it maintains cohesion. Keep it the research in your spare time, and keep your students from trying to replicate them. Of course, I'll keep you informed. With that, Power Loader closed the call, leaving Nedzu to sit and consider the conundrum. Muzutafu. Airjet sat down, shaking out his shoulders as he landed on the roof. The other heroes of the area, Death Arms, Backdraft, and Home Run all stared at him with surprise. Well, where is he? Death Arms gestured around, wonderingly. Did you let him go or something? With a sigh, Airjet reached up, popping his helmet off to reveal close-cropped red hair and blue eyes. No, I didn't let him go. Kaze Shimura sighed again and rubbed at his neck. Backdraft blinked. He escaped. Completely effing outplayed me at the last minute. Home Run buried his face in his hands and groaned, even as Death Arms cursed. For F's sake. How? Kaze looked to the side, but he was replaying that last motion. A 180-degree turn as I was adjusting to shoot him out of the sky. By the time I cleared it, he was facing the other way, and then he just accelerated. And? You can reach highway speeds on that pack. Couldn't you keep up? Kaze glanced up and shook his head. Nope. That thing's acceleration, when he had a clear shot. I know my limits. Pushing myself that hard is a one-way ticket to blowing out my pack and passing out from exhaustion. Sheet, really? Yeah. The four heroes were quiet, and Airjet sighed. I need to go place my report with the commission. Have fun. Ow. Izuku flinched, eyes closed, as Epsilon poked and prodded at the bruises that dotted his cheekbone and the discoloration around his throat. He knew he had taken that switchback too fast, but he didn't know how bad until he got back to the lab and took off his helmet. Bruises lined his cheeks and eye sockets, and around his neck where the hermetic seal had been. With his jacket and suit stripped to the waist, there were also long sections of his back and arms which had what looked like forming bruises, capillaries popped and aching from the repeated pressure of his maneuvers. Which was when Epsilon had pulled him aside and explained what Tetsu had suggested. Izuku, even as Epsilon poked and prodded his bruises, was considering her offer. I know you've studied my quirk, but have I ever explained the possibilities of misuse? Izuku glanced down once more, taking in the way. His ankles and calves were aching from his stance. The way bruises lined his body. A flash of memory of the first time he had escaped the heroes, how that last-moment acceleration had almost made him blackout. The adrenaline of both events had been the reason he ignored them, the feeling of flight. He glanced at Epsilon. She was nervous, had been for almost 20 minutes as she inspected and checked over his wounds, ever since she had made her offer. Epsilon, I trust you. Her eyes went wide and he gave a soft smile. Please, let me make my dream a reality. Please. Use your quirk on me freely. Epsilon wavered but met his eyes. A deep, rattling breath and she nodded. She rubbed her face. This is going to be hard. F dash dot. Turning back, she called out the door. Old man, Bite, get over here. She walked back and grabbed a tablet, connecting it to the screen in her customized medical bay as Tetsu and Bite rushed in. Alright, we need to do some research. She glanced back, nervous but resolved to help, as Izuku looked on. How do we condition your body to take G-forces and survive high-speed pressure? Smile still on his lips, Izuku started talking. Quirk research number 5. Epsilon. Moriaka nao Suko. Quirk. Biotranslation. Epsilon's quirk can change the type and severity of physical injuries. The general severity and level of damage will stay unchanged. She can, however, split up a single wound into a variety of smaller, lesser wounds. Uses both her own stamina as well as the target's. It can heal lethal wounds. Theorized that her quirk affects cell structures and rebuilds injured areas at the cost of damaging another location of the subject. Addition, simulated damage and growth are possible, as well as encouraging cellular adaptations to injuries. See Horizon number 2 under Body, Physical Adaptations.